Painting is a hobby for failures, get a real career. My father repeated those words to me for 2 decades. He finally visited the City Museum with his billionaire friends to admire a record-breaking exhibit. He stopped in front of the main wall, looked at the artist plaque, and the blood drained from his face. He realized the anonymous artist he had been praising was the daughter he disowned. I am Chloe, 34 years old, and before I reveal how I let my own family build their federal prison sentences using my fake art, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy seeing toxic elitists get exactly what they deserve. The crystal wine glasses chimed as the hired waitstaff cleared the china plates from the long mahogany table. We were sitting in the formal dining room of my father's estate. Charles Sterling did not host family dinners to bond. He hosted them to assert dominance. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket, withdrew a folded slip of paper, and tossed it across the polished wood. It slid to a halt right next to my water goblet. I picked it up. It was a personal check written out to me for $5,000. Take the money and enroll in a real estate licensing course tomorrow morning, my father stated. His tone left no room for negotiation. You are 34 years old, Chloe. It is time to drop this phase. You work as a low-level art appraiser making pennies to stare at dusty canvases. It is an embarrassment to the Sterling name. Sell houses, make real money, be useful to this family for once. Across the table, my older brother Preston chuckled. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, leaning back with the ease of a man who had been handed the keys to the kingdom at birth. Next to him sat his wife, Victoria. She adjusted an oversized diamond necklace that caught the ambient light, offering me a tight, patronizing smile. Listen to him, Chloe, Victoria chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Preston just secured another luxury gallery location downtown. We deal in high society assets. You cannot keep playing starving artist forever. It makes our circle uncomfortable when they ask what you do. I did not tear up. I did not shove the check back across the table. I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into my blazer pocket. I kept my breathing even, maintaining a calm, unreadable expression. Arguing with a man who viewed his children solely as a return on investment was a waste of oxygen. Good timing, Preston said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He turned toward the far wall of the dining room, where a large frame was draped under a velvet cloth. Since we are discussing real value, I want to show you all my latest acquisition. I outbid 3 international collectors for this piece. It cost me $2 million, but it solidifies my gallery as the premier dealer in the state. He grabbed the corner of the fabric and pulled it away. A collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the room from the few business associates my father had invited. The canvas displayed a chaotic blend of deep indigo and striking gold lines. This is the newest piece by Zephyr Preston, announced, puffing out his chest. The artist is a ghost. No public appearances, no interviews. Just pure, unadulterated genius. The value of this canvas will double by next quarter. I stared at the painting. My pulse slowed to a steady, deliberate rhythm. I let my eyes trace the thick strokes of gold paint across the upper left quadrant. The shading was flat. The structural underpainting, a signature layering technique required to give the indigo depth, was missing. The brushwork lacked the distinct rhythmic pressure I always applied when my wrist fatigued after a 6-hour session. The painting was a forgery. I knew this with infallible certainty because I am Zephyr. The original canvas that Preston claimed to have just purchased was currently resting inside a climate-controlled biometric vault in my private studio across town. My brother had not spent $2 million on a masterpiece. He had acquired a black market replica. The gears in my mind shifted, piecing together the financial reality of his business. Preston was using his high-end gallery as a front. He was purchasing cheap fakes and fabricating the sale prices to wash illicit cash generated from my father's shadowy real estate ventures. Victoria noticed my silent scrutiny. She tilted her head, a mocking smirk playing on her lips. "What is the matter, Chloe?" she asked loudly, ensuring the entire table focused on me. "Does your little appraiser eye not comprehend true greatness? Or are you just bitter? You will never create anything worth a fraction of that canvas." I let a slow, pleasant smile touch my lips. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "It is breathtaking, Victoria," I replied smoothly. "Do you mind if I take a quick photo to commemorate Preston's remarkable success?" Preston waved a hand generously, soaking up the validation. Go ahead. Maybe it will inspire you to find a real career. I raised my phone, framing the canvas on my screen. I did not focus on the painted indigo waves. I zoomed in on the bottom right corner of the frame, capturing a crisp, high-resolution image of the small metallic provenance tag and the gallery registration code attached to the wood. I pressed the shutter button. The digital trap had just opened, and my family was standing dead center on the trigger. The morning sun cast sharp geometric shadows across the polished concrete floors of Preston's downtown gallery. I walked through the heavy glass doors, carrying 2 steaming cups of artisan coffee. The space was meticulously designed to intimidate the uninitiated. Stark white walls featured isolated canvases, illuminated by precise surgical spotlights. It was a temple built on unearned wealth, projecting a manufactured aura of high culture. My brother loved to present himself as a refined cultural curator to his elite clients. I knew he was just a glorified salesman masking a severe lack of actual talent. Victoria was stationed at the front reception desk. She wore a pristine white silk blouse and tapped a designer pen against a leather-bound ledger. She clearly did not know how to read. When she looked up and saw me, her posture stiffened immediately. Her eyes darted to my sensible trench coat, mentally evaluating the cost of my wardrobe and finding it entirely lacking compared to her standard. Chloe Victoria drawled, her tone laced with immediate, undisguised suspicion. Preston is handling an urgent international client call in his private office. We do not have time for random family drop-ins today. If you need a personal loan, you will have to make an appointment next week. I offered a warm, bright smile, holding up the cardboard drink carrier. No loans needed, Victoria. I am just dropping off his favorite dark roast to celebrate last night's incredible acquisition. I brought your iced macchiato as well. Extra caramel, just how you like it. Greed and entitlement will always override basic caution. Victoria reached eagerly for the iced drink. I stepped forward, subtly adjusting my grip on the cardboard carrier. With a practiced, seamless flick of my wrist, the plastic lid of the hot coffee popped loose. The dark, scalding liquid sloshed over the rim, cascading directly down the front of her pristine white silk blouse. Victoria let out a piercing shriek. The sound echoed harshly off the minimalist gallery walls. She dropped her designer pen, frantically pulling the ruined, stained fabric away from her skin. Her face turned a mottled, furious shade of red. "My shirt," she gasped, staring at the dark brown stains spreading across her chest. "This is custom-imported silk, you clumsy, pathetic idiot." "I am so sorry," I said, injecting my voice with a heavy dose of manufactured panic. My heel caught on the edge of the rug. "You need to get club soda on that fabric immediately before the stain sets permanently." Vanity is the most predictable weakness in a narcissist. Victoria spun around on her expensive heels and sprinted toward the employee restroom down the hall, leaving the front desk entirely abandoned. The main gallery floor was deserted. I had exactly 3 minutes before her shrieking brought security or my brother out of his office. I did not waste a single precious second. I bypassed the reception area and moved swiftly down the private corridor. Preston's office door was slightly ajar. He was not on an international client call. I could hear his voice echoing from the loading dock at the opposite end of the building, berating a junior gallery assistant about lighting fixtures. I slipped inside his office and pushed the heavy oak door shut until the latch clicked softly into place. His workspace was a cluttered mess of disorganized shipping invoices and half-empty liquor glasses. Right in the center of the mahogany desk sat his primary computer terminal. The monitor was glowing brightly. He had stepped away without locking his screen. Arrogance always breeds terrible digital hygiene. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a specialized flash drive. It looked like a standard memory stick, but it was pre-loaded with a silent data extraction script. I had coded myself specifically for this kind of corporate espionage. I slid the metal drive into the port. A faint green progress bar materialized in the corner of his screen, siphoning the master financial ledgers directly into my encrypted partition. I kept my eyes fixed on the door while reading the raw data cascading across the monitor. Forensic accounting requires finding the negative space where the actual truth hides. You do not look at what is there. You look for what is missing. Preston was not running a legitimate art gallery. He was operating a highly sophisticated washing machine for dirty capital. The digital ledgers laid the entire criminal operation bare. There were no receipts for multi-million-dollar auction bids. There were no transfer records to elusive contemporary artists. Instead, I found shipping manifests from an industrial manufacturing port in Southeast Asia. Preston was importing bulk orders of counterfeit canvases, declaring them at customs as cheap, decorative hotel decor. Once the fakes arrived in his back room, he attached forged provenance papers and fake appraisal certificates to them. He then created a network of phantom buyers. These fictitious international collectors would purchase the fake art for astronomical sums. The money funding these fake purchases flowed directly from a labyrinth of shell companies owned and operated by our father, Charles Sterling. My father was taking undeclared, untaxed cash from his shady real estate developments and funneling it straight through Preston's gallery. The fake art sale transformed the dirty street cash into legitimate taxable gallery revenue. It was textbook money laundering executed with breathtaking brazenness. The progress bar hit 99%. A shadow suddenly blocked the frosted glass of the office window. The brass doorknob turned forcefully. I yanked the flash drive from the USB port and slipped it up my sleeve just as Preston threw the door open. His eyes locked onto me standing behind his desk. The charming, refined art dealer persona vanished instantly. His face contorted into a rigid mask of raw, lethal hostility. He crossed the room in 2 long strides. He grabbed my shoulders and shoved me backward. My spine hit the plaster wall hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. He pressed his heavy forearm against my collarbone, pinning me firmly in place. "What are you doing in my office?" Preston hissed, his breath hot and angry against my face. I kept my expression entirely neutral, meeting his furious gaze without a single blink. "I brought you coffee." Victoria spilled hers. "I was just leaving to get some napkins." His grip tightened. His fingers dug painfully into my skin through the fabric of my trench coat. "You think you are clever, Chloe. You think your little appraiser job makes you an expert on my world. If I ever catch you snooping around my business again, I will ruin you. I will call the board of directors at your auction house and tell them you take under-the-table bribes to verify fakes. I will have your credentials permanently stripped. You will never work in the art world again. Do you understand me?" He was explicitly threatening to destroy my entire livelihood. He wanted to see fear in my eyes. He expected me to cower, to apologize, and to beg for my job. He needed to feel the intoxicating rush of power over his lesser sibling. I did not struggle against his hold. I offered him a slow, chilling smile that did not reach my eyes. "I understand perfectly, Preston." I replied, my voice steady and dangerously quiet. He scoffed, releasing me with a forceful shove toward the door. "Get out of my gallery, and stick to your dusty estate sales before you get hurt." I adjusted my trench coat, smoothing the fabric where his hands had wrinkled it. I walked out of his office, leaving him to nurse his fragile ego. I did not look back as I exited the building and stepped out into the crisp morning air. Preston thought he had successfully intimidated a low-level appraiser into total submission. He thought his secrets were safely locked behind his mahogany doors and his loud verbal threats. He had no idea that the small metal drive resting in the palm of my hand had not just copied his files. The drive contained a localized cellular transmitter. While his forearm was pinned against my chest, the device had already finished uploading the encrypted money laundering ledgers to a highly secure federal server. The damning financial data was currently sitting on the desk of an elite Internal Revenue Service criminal investigator. The drive from Preston's gallery to the downtown financial district took 20 minutes. My hands rested steadily on the leather steering wheel. My brother's threat to destroy my career echoed in the quiet cabin of my car, but it triggered zero panic. A threat only holds weight if the person delivering it possesses actual leverage. Preston held a crumbling house of cards. I held the lit match. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the federal building. The brutalist concrete architecture stood in stark contrast to the manufactured elegance of the gallery I had just left. This was a place devoid of velvet ropes and champagne flutes. It was a facility built for consequences. Navigating the security checkpoints required precise identification. I clipped a temporary visitor badge to my lapel and took the elevator to the designated floor for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The corridors were quiet, lined with frosted glass doors, and agents who spoke in hushed, serious tones. I walked directly to a corner office at the end of the hall. I did not knock. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Sitting behind a gunmetal desk was Marcus. My sister Maya had married him 5 years ago, much to the quiet disdain of my father. Charles Sterling preferred sons-in-law who could be bought, manipulated, or drafted into his shady real estate ventures. Marcus was none of those things. As an African-American man who had climbed the ranks to become a senior federal investigator, he possessed a razor-sharp intellect and a moral compass forged from steel. He dismantled white-collar syndicates for a living. He viewed tax evasion not merely as a crime, but as a personal insult to his analytical mind. Marcus looked up from a stack of financial subpoenas. He did not offer a warm family greeting. He read the posture of my shoulders and the unblinking focus in my eyes. He knew this was not a social visit. I walked to his desk and dropped the physical flash drive onto the metal surface. It landed with a sharp clink next to his coffee mug. "The raw ledger data transmitted to your secure server 10 minutes ago," I stated, pulling up a guest chair and taking a seat. But I brought the physical backup. Preston caught me in his office. He threatened to revoke my appraisal license if I kept digging into his inventory. Marcus leaned forward. His dark eyes locked onto the small metal drive. He did not offer empty words of comfort regarding my brother's physical intimidation. Sympathy was useless in this room. Strategy was the only currency that mattered. He picked up the drive and plugged it into an isolated, secure terminal on his desk. The encrypted files I had siphoned from the gallery began to populate his screen. The reflection of scrolling data illuminated his face. I watched the calculating gears shift behind his eyes as he processed the numbers. A slow, predatory smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was the distinct expression of a hunter who had just tracked his prey into a dead-end canyon. "Your brother is a terrible bookkeeper," Marcus noted, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "He relies on the subjective valuation of contemporary art to mask the origin of his capital. He imports worthless canvas replicas, slaps a fake certificate of authenticity on them, and records a $2 million sale. The cash paying for those fakes originates from your father's shell companies in Delaware. It cleans the dirty money from Charles's real estate scams," I added, watching the transaction logs scroll by. "Charles hands the dirty cash to offshore proxies. Those proxies purchase the fake art from Preston. The money enters the domestic banking system as legitimate gallery revenue, clean, taxable, and ready to be spent." Marcus typed a rapid sequence of commands into his keyboard, cross-referencing the gallery ledgers with a separate federal database he had been monitoring. The steady clicking of the keys filled the silent office. He stopped typing and let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "Washing the cash is just the opening act, Chloe," Marcus said, turning his monitor so I could see the screen. "Your father and your brother are not just laundering money. They are preparing to execute one of the most audacious federal tax frauds I have seen this quarter." I leaned closer to the screen. The document displayed was a drafted proposal for a charitable trust transfer. It outlined a planned donation of 25 contemporary art pieces to the City Museum. The total valuation listed on the draft was a staggering $15 million. "They are donating the fake collection," I whispered, the sheer scale of the deception snapping into focus. Marcus nodded, his expression hardening. "Charles intends to gift the entire counterfeit collection to the museum at a highly inflated appraisal value. Under federal tax law, donating an asset of that size to a registered nonprofit institution allows the donor to claim a monumental charitable deduction." I did the math instantly. By claiming a $15 million deduction, Charles would effectively wipe out his capital gains tax liability for the entire fiscal year. He would avoid paying the government millions of dollars he legally owed from his recent commercial property sales. He was using forged paintings of my own artistic alter ego to rob the federal treasury. "When is the donation scheduled to execute?" I asked, my pulse quickening at the scope of their greed. "The museum is hosting their annual benefactor gala next weekend," Marcus replied. "Charles plans to unveil the collection on the main exhibition wall and formally sign the transfer deeds in front of the city elite and the press. It is a brilliant public relations stunt designed to make him look like a generous philanthropist while he robs the public blind. We have the ledgers," I said, pointing to the flash drive. "We have the proof that the paintings are imported fakes. You can freeze Preston's accounts right now. You can arrest them before the gala." Marcus held up a hand, halting my momentum. His gaze was intense, calculating the chessboard several moves ahead. If I send agents into that gallery today, we catch Preston for basic wire fraud and money laundering. It is a solid case, but Charles has enough expensive lawyers to insulate himself. He will claim Preston acted alone. He will say he was just a proud father buying art from his son, entirely unaware of the illicit origins. Charles will walk away and Preston will take a plea deal for a few years in a minimum security facility. Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. We are not going to arrest them today, Chloe. We are going to let them proceed. We let Charles stand in front of the cameras at the gala. We let him officially sign the federal tax deduction forms, claiming the $15 million value. The moment his pen hits that paper, he commits felony tax evasion and fraud against the United States government. The crime becomes inescapable. I understood the strategy perfectly. We needed to wait for the ultimate incrimination. I nodded my agreement, but a lingering question troubled me. The logic of the scheme possessed a glaring vulnerability. The museum board does not just blindly accept a $15 million valuation, I pointed out, furrowing my brow. The Internal Revenue Service requires strict documentation for non-cash charitable contributions. Charles cannot just declare the art is worth that much. He needs an official Form 8283. Marcus tapped his desk, his eyes locking onto mine with a chilling realization. Exactly. Section B of that specific federal tax form requires the signature of a qualified independent appraiser. An expert must legally certify the authenticity and the market value of the donated items under penalty of perjury. The air in the office suddenly felt incredibly thin. I stared at Marcus as the terrifying reality of my father's plan finally crystallized in my mind. Charles and Preston knew the art was fake. They knew that if the government ever initiated an audit, the appraiser who signed that federal form would be investigated, discredited, and potentially indicted for facilitating the fraud. No legitimate independent art expert in the city would ever risk their career and their freedom to verify those suspicious canvases, unless the expert was someone they could manipulate, someone they could threaten, someone they viewed as a disposable asset. My father did not hand me a check last night just to insult my career. Preston did not shove me against a wall today just to protect his ego. They were setting the stage. They need a scapegoat. I breathed, the icy dread spreading through my chest. They need a licensed appraiser with an unblemished reputation to sign the federal tax forms. If the IRS ever audits the donation, the appraiser takes the fall for the fake valuation. Marcus remained silent, letting the heavy truth settle between us. They are going to force me to sign the appraisal, I stated, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. My own father plans to use my license to legitimize his tax fraud, and when the federal agents eventually come knocking, he intends to let me go to prison in his place. The realization that my own father intended to use me as a human shield against federal prison sentences hardened my resolve into something impenetrable. I left Marcus's office with a clear directive to play the oblivious, struggling appraiser until the night of the museum gala. I had to let Charles and Preston believe their trap was tightening around me. I did not anticipate that Victoria, driven by petty, shallow vengeance over a stained silk blouse, would launch her own chaotic assault and inadvertently accelerate the timeline. 2 days after the incident at the gallery, an embossed cream-colored envelope arrived at my small apartment. It was a formal invitation to a philanthropic afternoon tea hosted at the Sterling estate. Victoria loved hosting these ostentatious gatherings. She used my father's sprawling gardens and catering budget to cultivate favor among the wives of local politicians and corporate executives. She treated these events as her personal stage, a place where she could perform the role of high society matriarch while secretly masking her middle-class insecurities with aggressive snobbery. The invitation explicitly requested my attendance. A handwritten note scrawled across the bottom in Victoria's looping script read, "Bring your little appraisal tools, Chloe. We have a special presentation planned." It was a transparent setup. She intended to humiliate me in front of the very social circle she desperately courted. She wanted to punish me for the ruined shirt and reassert her dominance over the family disappointment. I accepted the invitation. Walking into an ambush is significantly less terrifying when you are carrying hidden explosives in your purse. I arrived at the estate precisely on time, wearing a simple tailored gray dress that contrasted sharply with the vibrant, expensive floral gowns worn by the other guests. The manicured back lawn was dotted with white linen tables and tiered trays of delicate pastries. The ambient chatter of 30 affluent women drifted over the sound of a hired harpist playing near the rose bushes. Victoria spotted me immediately. Her eyes gleamed with malicious anticipation. She wore a stunning sapphire blue dress and her signature oversized diamond necklace. She glided across the grass flanked by 3 women whose husbands served on the board of my father's real estate firm. She was bringing her audience. "Chloe, darling, you actually came?" Victoria projected her voice clearly over the music, ensuring the surrounding tables stopped their conversations to watch the interaction. "We were just discussing your quaint little job at the auction house. I told the ladies how dedicated you are to studying old, dusty objects." The women tittered politely, their eyes scanning my modest attire with undisguised judgment. I offered a placid, impenetrable smile. It requires a certain level of focus to distinguish genuine value from cheap imitation. "Victoria," I replied evenly, "it is an acquired skill." Victoria's smile tightened into a brittle line. She gestured grandly to a velvet-covered pedestal set up near the center of the patio. Resting on top was an ornate gilded porcelain vase adorned with intricate hand-painted dragons and gold leaf detailing. "Since you claim to be such an expert," Victoria announced, raising her voice to command the attention of the entire gathering, "I wanted to give you an opportunity to prove your worth. My husband purchased this Ming Dynasty vase for our foyer. He paid $50,000 for it at a private auction in London. I thought it would be delightful to have our resident appraiser verify its magnificent history for the guests. It was a brilliant, cruel trap. If I verified the vase as genuine, I was merely confirming her wealth and status, acting as a subservient employee, validating her luxury. If I declared it a fake, she would unleash a rehearsed tirade mocking my incompetence, tearing down my professional reputation, and claiming I was simply jealous of her husband's success. She was ready to publicly declare me a fraud, regardless of my answer. I walked slowly toward the pedestal. The women gathered closer, forming a tight, expectant circle around me. The harpist stopped playing. The silence on the patio grew heavy and suffocating. I did not need my magnifying loupe or ultraviolet light to assess the object. A single glance at the vibrant synthetic cobalt pigment used on the dragon scales told me everything I needed to know. Genuine Ming Dynasty porcelain utilizes a natural cobalt ore that fires unevenly in a kiln, creating a distinct mottled texture known as the heaped and piled effect. This vase possessed the flat uniform coloring of modern chemical dyes. It was a mass-produced replica, likely manufactured in a factory less than a decade ago. It was worth maybe $200 at a generic home decor store. I turned to face Victoria. Her eyes shone with cruel, expectant triumph. She waited for me to stumble to sweat to offer a panicked, uncertain assessment. "It is a lovely decorative piece, Victoria," I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the silent patio. "However, it is not Ming Dynasty. It is a modern reproduction. The cobalt pigment is synthetic, and the firing glaze lacks the necessary oxidation pitting characteristic of a piece from that era. It was not purchased at a private London auction. It was likely procured from a commercial wholesale catalog." A collective audible gasp rippled through the affluent crowd. The women exchanged shocked, uncomfortable glances. Victoria's face flushed a deep mottled red. Her trap had been sprung, and she immediately launched into her prepared counterattack. "You are absolutely clueless," Victoria hissed, dropping all pretense of polite society manners. She pointed a shaking manicured finger at me. "You do not know the first thing about fine art or antiquities. You are a bitter, failing clerk who cannot stand the fact that Preston and I possess real wealth. You are trying to embarrass me because you are jealous of my life." She took a step closer, her chest heaving with manufactured indignation. The massive diamond necklace rested heavily against her collarbone, catching the afternoon sunlight. I should have known better than to ask a glorified thrift store cashier to evaluate a masterpiece. You wouldn't know genuine luxury if it was hanging right in front of your face. She thrust her chest forward, inadvertently thrusting the heavy necklace directly into my line of sight. She was using her jewelry as a physical weapon, a glittering shield of undeniable wealth designed to crush my credibility. I looked at the necklace. I did not step back. I engaged the tactical precision required to dismantle a hostile entity. "Speaking of genuine luxury hanging right in front of my face," I said, my tone dropping to a quiet, lethal register that forced the surrounding women to lean in closer to hear. As a certified appraiser, I am required to possess a deep understanding of gemology and light refraction. I did not touch her. I simply pointed a single steady finger toward the center stone resting against her skin. "A genuine diamond of that carat weight possesses a high refractive index," I explained, addressing the captive audience of wealthy wives. "It bends light internally, creating a brilliant, sharp sparkle that is predominantly white, with only subtle flashes of color, known as fire." I paused, letting my eyes lock onto Victoria's widening, panicked stare. "Your necklace, Victoria, is exhibiting the classic disco ball effect. It is reflecting an excessive amount of rainbow-colored light flashes. That occurs because the stones possess a lower refractive index and a higher dispersion rate. It is the defining optical signature of cubic zirconia. You are wearing a necklace made of cheap synthetic glass." The silence on the patio fractured into a chaotic symphony of sharp intakes of breath and frantic, hushed whispers. The elite women, who spent their entire lives judging the authenticity of their peers' designer handbags and luxury vehicles, immediately scrutinized Victoria's chest. The illusion of her untouchable wealth shattered instantly. Victoria looked down at her chest, her hands flying up to cover the glittering stones as if she had suddenly caught fire. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. She realized the women around her were no longer looking at her with envy. They were looking at her with profound, unvarnished pity. She had attempted to publicly humiliate me over a fake vase, and I had effortlessly exposed her as a walking, talking fraud. "You are a liar!" Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "Get out of my house! Get off this property right now!" I did not argue. I smoothed my gray dress, picked up my purse, and walked calmly toward the exit. The crowd parted for me, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and newly minted respect. I left Victoria weeping furiously near the velvet pedestal, frantically dialing her phone to summon Preston. The satisfaction of exposing her shallow deception was brief. When you humiliate a narcissist in front of their chosen audience, the retaliation is never proportional. It is always absolute. The next morning, I sat at my small kitchen table sipping black coffee. My phone buzzed against the wood. I unlocked the screen. It was an email from the Human Resources Department of the prestigious auction house, where I had worked tirelessly for 6 years. The subject line was brief and definitive: notice of immediate termination. The email did not cite poor performance or departmental restructuring. It stated that my employment was terminated due to a sudden and irreconcilable conflict of interest regarding the firm's primary financial backers. I set the phone down. The coffee tasted bitter. Charles and Preston had moved with terrifying speed. They had leveraged their massive financial influence, threatening to pull their lucrative accounts and demanding the auction house sever all ties with me immediately. They had successfully executed the threat Preston made in his office. They had stripped me of my job, my income, and my professional credentials. I was completely cut off, isolated, and entirely vulnerable. They believed they had crushed my spirit. They believed an unemployed, disgraced appraiser would have no choice but to crawl back to the family estate begging for forgiveness and financial support. They believed they had perfectly primed their desperate scapegoat, ready to blindly sign whatever federal tax forms they placed in front of me to regain their favor. I stared at the termination email. I did not feel a single ounce of fear or panic. The safety net of my modest, predictable career had been burned away. There was nothing left holding me back. I stood up, walked into my private studio, and locked the heavy deadbolt. I pulled the canvas cover off my easel. The time for playing the quiet, observant appraiser was officially over. It was time for Zephyr to make a move. The termination email sat in my inbox, a sterile digital decree meant to crush my spirit and force me into submission. Charles and Preston expected me to spend the afternoon weeping in my apartment, mourning the loss of a prestigious career I had spent 6 years building. They anticipated a frantic phone call, a desperate plea for financial rescue, and a swift return to the family fold as their obedient, disgraced pawn. I did not shed a single tear. I closed the email application, picked up my empty coffee mug, and washed it in the sink. The auction house was a respectable institution, but it was merely my day job. It was the necessary mundane cover I utilized to navigate the art world without drawing unwanted scrutiny. My true profession, my actual empire, operated entirely in the shadows. I walked into my private studio and engaged the heavy steel deadbolt. I pulled the blackout curtains shut, plunging the room into cool artificial twilight. Stepping past the easels and the scent of linseed oil, I approached a reinforced steel cabinet disguised as a supply closet. I unlocked it, retrieving a specialized air-gapped laptop that never connected to standard commercial networks. I booted the system. The screen glowed with a harsh command line interface. I routed my connection through a layered network of international proxies, masking my digital footprint across servers in Geneva, Reykjavik, and Singapore. I entered a 56-character alphanumeric passphrase, unlocking the encrypted portal used by elite brokers, untraceable collectors, and the black market dealing in high-value antiquities. I was no longer Chloe, the unemployed appraiser. I resurrected my primary identity. I was Zephyr. The strategy required a flawless psychological pivot. Preston had just severed my legitimate income, believing he had isolated me. He was currently sitting in his gallery feeling invincible, preparing to execute a staggering tax fraud with a collection of cheap replicas. He needed an anchor. He needed one undeniable, verifiable masterpiece to distract the museum curators and the federal auditors from the counterfeit junk surrounding it. I drafted an email directed to the private acquisition address of Preston's gallery. I did not use my own voice. I adopted the persona of an eccentric, highly guarded European art broker acting on behalf of the elusive painter. The pitch was irresistible bait crafted with surgical precision to exploit my brother's insatiable greed. I informed him that Zephyr was offering a pristine, uncatalogued canvas titled The Indigo Fracture. The artwork had never been displayed publicly. It possessed flawless provenance and was guaranteed to dominate the contemporary market. I set the purchase price at exactly $3 million. It was a highly calculated figure. $3 million was an astronomical sum for a single piece, but it was just low enough to trigger Preston's predatory instincts. He would instantly calculate the resale value, assuming he could flip a verified unseen Zephyr at the upcoming museum gala for at least $7 million. It was the ultimate prize, a golden ticket that would legitimize his entire fraudulent operation and cement his status as a premier dealer. I added a strict, non-negotiable condition to the bottom of the message. The transaction required an immediate, untraceable offshore wire transfer within 24 hours. If the funds did not clear the designated Swiss routing number by noon the following day, the canvas would be offered to a rival gallery in New York. I pressed send and watched the encrypted packet vanish into the digital ether. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the blinking cursor on the dark screen. The waiting game was a test of nerve. Preston was arrogant, but he was also facing an immense logistical nightmare. I knew his financial ledgers intimately. I had downloaded his entire operation onto Marcus's desk just days ago. Preston did not possess $3 million in liquid cash. His capital was entirely tied up in Charles's illicit real estate ventures and the overhead costs of importing the counterfeit inventory. To seize this opportunity, my brother would have to scramble. He would have to pull money from dark corners, expose his hidden assets, or make a reckless, desperate borrowing decision. Greed is a powerful catalyst for catastrophic mistakes. 42 minutes later, the secure server chimed. A reply materialized in my encrypted inbox. Preston had taken the bait without asking a single question about the physical condition of the artwork. He did not request a viewing. He did not ask for a spectroscopic analysis. His response was frantic, written with the urgent, sloppy syntax of a man blinded by a potential multi-million-dollar windfall. He agreed to the price. He agreed to the timeline. He begged the broker to hold the canvas, promising the wire transfer would be initiated first thing in the morning. A chilling satisfaction settled in my chest. He was sprinting willingly into a trap lined with federal razor wire. I shut down the encrypted laptop and secured it back inside the steel cabinet. The first phase of the counteroffensive was active. I spent the rest of the evening preparing my studio, moving the authentic Zephyr canvases into the biometric vault, and organizing my remaining appraisal files. The silence of the apartment was a stark contrast to the financial warfare erupting across the city. At 6 o'clock the next morning, my burner phone vibrated against the glass surface of my desk. Only one person possessed that specific number. I picked it up and answered without offering a greeting. The connection crackled briefly before Marcus's deep voice filled the line. He sounded different today. The usual detached clinical tone of the federal investigator was gone, replaced by a sharp, highly dangerous edge. "You threw a massive piece of bait into the water," Chloe Marcus stated, the typing of his keyboard audible in the background. The IRS tracking algorithms lit up like a fireworks display at midnight. "Your brother took the hook, but his reaction is escalating the timeline." "He agreed to the $3 million," I replied, keeping my voice low. I set the trap, knowing he lacked the immediate liquidity. I assumed he would try to pull the funds from Charles's shell companies, forcing my father to expose his offshore routing networks to cover the purchase. He tried. Marcus revealed, his voice tightening. "We monitored the digital traffic. Preston sent urgent funding requests to 3 of your father's primary Delaware holding accounts last night. Charles denied every single one. Your father is locking down his capital to prepare for the museum gala donation. He refused to give Preston the cash." I frowned, tracing a crack in my wooden desk. If Charles refused to fund the acquisition, Preston has no mechanism to secure $3 million by noon. He does not have the credit score to secure a legitimate commercial bank loan in that time frame. "That is exactly the problem," Marcus said, and the grim intensity in his voice made my pulse spike. "Desperate men do not walk away from a perceived jackpot." When Charles cut off the cash supply, Preston bypassed the traditional banking sector entirely. He went to a shadow lender operating out of the financial district. We have been building a RICO case against this specific lending syndicate for 2 years. They provide rapid, high-interest bridge loans to executives who cannot pass a standard audit. My grip on the phone tightened. Borrowing from a shadow syndicate means he had to provide immediate, tangible collateral. What did he leverage? He does not own the gallery building, and his inventory is fake. There was a heavy, suffocating pause on the line. "He leveraged residential real estate," Marcus finally answered. "Specifically, a newly renovated townhouse in the suburbs. The paperwork was pushed through a corrupt title agency 3 hours ago. The loan was approved, and the $3 million is currently sitting in escrow preparing to wire to your Swiss account." A cold, sickening dread washed over me. I did not own a townhouse in the suburbs. Charles lived in the estate. But I knew exactly who had just purchased a modest home after years of saving every penny from her teaching salary. Maya, my younger sister Maya, the only member of the Sterling family who possessed a genuine, kind heart. She was the youngest innocent and entirely detached from the toxic corporate machinations of our father and brother. Maya had just closed on her first house last month, a milestone she achieved without asking Charles for a single dime. "He used Maya's house." I breathed the words, tasting like ash. How is that even possible? "The deed is solely in her name. Preston serves as the administrative executor for the family trust," Marcus explained, the anger now palpable in his tone. "He used his executive clearance to forge a power of attorney document. He digitally altered Maya's signature to assign the property deed as collateral for the shadow loan. If Preston defaults on this $3 million debt, the syndicate takes your sister's house. They will evict her by the end of the month." The revelation struck me with physical force. Preston was not just attempting to launder money or inflate his ego. He was actively cannibalizing our innocent sister to finance his greed. He was willing to render Maya homeless, destroying her hard-earned security just to purchase a painting he intended to flip for a profit. The battle was no longer just about exposing a tax fraud or avenging my professional reputation. My brother had crossed a line that fundamentally altered the rules of engagement. He had targeted the only pure thing left in our bloodline. "Cancel the wire transfer," I commanded, stepping away from the desk. My voice was a lethal, unwavering blade. "Stop the money from leaving the escrow account." "I cannot do that," Chloe Marcus replied firmly. "If I freeze the escrow account now, the shadow syndicate will instantly realize they are under federal surveillance. They will destroy their ledgers and vanish. Preston will claim his identity was stolen. We lose the syndicate, and we lose the wire fraud charges against your brother." "Then what do we do?" I demanded. "He is holding a gun to Maya's future. We let the money wire," Marcus stated, his tactical mindset overriding the emotional chaos. "We let the $3 million hit your offshore account. The moment the funds cross international lines, Preston commits aggravated wire fraud and identity theft. But more importantly, once you control that cash, you hold the exact amount needed to pay off the syndicate and release the lien on Maya's house. You take his money and you use it to buy back your sister's freedom. The strategy was flawless, cold, and devastating. I would let him steal the money, and then I would steal it right back, leaving him empty-handed and staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. "Let the wire clear," I told Marcus. "The execution begins tonight." I ended the call. The silence of the studio was replaced by the deafening roar of impending war. Preston thought he was securing a masterpiece. He had no idea he was purchasing his own destruction. The knowledge that Preston had weaponized Maya's home fundamentally altered the stakes. This was no longer a tactical chess match regarding tax evasion. My brother had declared total war on an innocent bystander, and I was going to ensure his financial casualties were absolute. I sat before my air-gapped terminal, the stark command line interface reflecting in my eyes. I drafted the final instructions from the anonymous European broker to Preston's gallery. The message was terse, demanding strict compliance. I provided the specific routing numbers for a heavily fortified numbered account located in Zurich. I stipulated that the $3 million must arrive via a direct international wire transfer. No holding companies, no secondary escrow delays. I demanded the raw capital hit the Swiss ledger by noon, or the masterpiece would be withdrawn permanently. I pressed send. The digital packet launched into the encrypted void. Now I waited for my brother's arrogance to seal his fate. Preston operated with a dangerous sense of invulnerability. He believed the Sterling family name provided a magical shield against consequences. He assumed his position within Charles's real estate empire granted him immunity from basic financial scrutiny. That arrogance dictated his next catastrophic mistake. Instead of utilizing a secure, untraceable terminal to conduct a high-risk illicit transaction involving forged collateral, Preston returned to his primary workspace. He sat behind his mahogany desk in the gallery, logged into his personal banking portal using his standard credentials, and connected his laptop directly to the gallery's public Wi-Fi network. The sheer stupidity of his action was almost insulting. By operating on a commercial network tied directly to the family corporation, he left a digital footprint the size of a crater. Across the city, inside the heavily monitored federal building, Marcus sat before a bank of glowing monitors. As a senior investigator for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, Marcus possessed authorization to deploy sophisticated tracking protocols on flagged accounts. He had secured a covert digital wiretap on the Shadow Syndicate's escrow account the moment they processed the fraudulent loan against Maya's property. Marcus watched the data stream in real time. The screen flashed a bright, undeniable yellow alert. A massive outbound transfer had been initiated from the syndicate's holding account. $3 million was officially in motion. Marcus leaned forward, his dark eyes tracking the digital trajectory. He monitored the source IP address. The data pinged loudly against the gallery's registered network. Preston was actively executing the transaction. The money surged through the domestic banking gateways, shedding layers of anonymity as it pushed toward the international exchange. At exactly 11:42 in the morning, Preston clicked the final confirmation button on his screen. The $3 million leaped across the Atlantic landing squarely in the Swiss account I controlled. In his office, Marcus allowed a slow, chilling smile to spread across his face. The moment the digital currency crossed the international boundary line, the legal parameters of the investigation shifted dramatically. Preston had not merely stolen from his sister. He had officially utilized an electronic communications network to transmit fraudulently obtained funds across an international border. He had just committed felony wire fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code. The mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for a transaction of that magnitude were severe. Marcus captured the routing logs, the IP address confirmation, and the timestamp, locking the pristine evidence into an airtight federal dossier. The trap had slammed shut. Preston was legally dead. He just hadn't received the autopsy report yet. My secure terminal chimed. A notification confirmed the Swiss account balance had increased by $3 million. The money was safe. Maya's home was essentially ransomed back, the funds resting securely in my vault, ready to obliterate the Shadow Syndicate's lien the moment the federal raid commenced. I closed the encrypted laptop, the tension in my shoulders easing marginally. The first major combat objective was achieved. The silence of my studio was abruptly shattered. The heavy steel deadbolt on my studio door did not simply click open. The reinforced door was violently kicked inward. The lock mechanism snapped the metal, tearing through the doorframe with a deafening crack. The heavy wood crashed against the plaster wall, sending a shower of white dust into the air. I spun away from my desk, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My father, Charles Sterling, stormed into the studio. His face was a mask of furious, unchecked authority. He wore a sharp charcoal business suit, completely out of place amid the scent of turpentine and scattered canvas. He did not walk in alone. Two massive men in dark suits flanked him, their posture radiating aggressive physical intimidation. They were his personal security contractors, men hired to handle problems that money could not easily erase. Charles did not offer a greeting. He marched directly into the center of the room, his eyes scanning the scattered art supplies with profound disgust. "You really thought you could hide in this pathetic little room and ignore your family obligations?" Charles bellowed, his voice echoing harshly off the high ceilings. I stood perfectly still, ensuring my body language projected zero panic. The encrypted laptop was safely locked away in the steel cabinet. My father was staring at the facade of a struggling appraiser, completely unaware he was shouting at the architect of his impending ruin. "You broke my door, Dad," I stated, my voice level and calm. "That is breaking and entering." Charles let out a harsh, abrasive laugh. "I pay the property taxes on this entire building, Chloe. I own the door. I own this room. And right now, I own you." He gestured sharply to the two security contractors. The men moved with terrifying synchronization. One of them stepped forward and grabbed a heavy wooden easel holding a half-finished landscape painting. Without a word, he hoisted the easel into the air and smashed it violently against the concrete floor. The wood splintered with a loud crack, the canvas tearing jaggedly. I flinched, my hands curling into tight fists at my sides, but I held my ground. The second man walked over to a supply table. He swept his massive arm across the surface, sending dozens of glass jars filled with expensive pigments, expensive brushes, and bottles of solvent crashing to the ground. The glass shattered, mixing a chaotic, muddy pool of chemicals across the floor. They were systematically destroying my sanctuary to establish immediate, terrifying dominance. Charles watched the destruction with a satisfied smirk. He waited until the echo of breaking glass faded, before turning his piercing gaze back to me. "You have ignored my phone calls since you were fired from the auction house," Charles said, stepping closer until he invaded my personal space. "You think you can just walk away from this family when things get difficult? You think you can abandon your responsibilities?" "I have no responsibilities to you," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady, despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "You had my career destroyed. You ensured I was fired. We have nothing left to discuss. We have exactly 15 million things to discuss." Charles corrected his tone, dropping to a dangerous, serrated whisper. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored manila envelope. He tossed it onto the only remaining intact table in the room. It landed with a heavy thud. "The museum gala is this weekend," Charles announced, his eyes narrowing. "Preston has secured the final piece for the collection. The exhibition is complete. I am donating the entire lot to the city. It is the crowning philanthropic achievement of my career, and it will save this family millions in federal taxes." I stared at the envelope, knowing exactly what toxic document rested inside. The Internal Revenue Service requires an independent appraisal for a non-cash charitable deduction of that magnitude. Charles continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "They need a certified expert to sign Form 8283, legally verifying that the artwork is genuine and worth the claimed $15 million. I am not an independent expert anymore, Dad." I shot back, a bitter edge creeping into my voice. "You made sure the auction house stripped my credentials. My signature is worthless." Charles smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "Your corporate credentials were revoked. Your state licensing as a private appraiser remains entirely valid. You are going to open that envelope, Chloe. You are going to sign the federal tax forms verifying the authenticity of Preston's collection. You are going to certify the $15 million valuation." He was explicitly demanding that I commit a federal crime. He wanted me to legally bind my name to his massive tax fraud, answering that if the government ever audited the donation, I would be the one facing the criminal charges for perjury and falsifying federal documents. He was handing me a loaded weapon and ordering me to point it at my own head. "I will not sign it," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "Preston's gallery is full of cheap fakes. I am not going to federal prison to cover your tax liabilities." The temperature in the room plummeted. Charles did not yell. He simply adjusted his cuffs, his expression hardening into absolute ruthlessness. He had anticipated my refusal. He had brought his ultimate leverage. "I expected you to be stubborn," Charles said smoothly, "so I made a few phone calls this morning. You know that private medical trust funding your mother's care facility?" My heart stopped. The blood froze in my veins. My mother resided in a specialized, highly expensive neurological care facility on the outskirts of the city. She required round-the-clock monitoring. The trust fund paying for her care was established years ago, but Charles maintained executive control as the primary trustee. "What did you do?" I demanded, the careful facade of calm instantly shattering. "I initiated a temporary administrative freeze on the medical trust," Charles stated casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "The facility administrators were notified an hour ago that the upcoming monthly payments have been suspended pending a portfolio review." I stared at him, profound horror washing over me. He was weaponizing the life support of his own wife to force my compliance. "If the facility does not receive the confirmed payment by Friday morning," Charles continued, watching my panic rise with deep satisfaction, "they will be forced to discharge her. She will be transferred to a state-funded low-income ward. You know exactly what those facilities are like, Chloe. They are understaffed, filthy, and entirely incapable of providing the specialized care she needs to survive." Charles stepped forward, tapping his finger firmly against the manila envelope resting on the table. "You have until tomorrow afternoon to sign these appraisal forms. If the signed documents are not delivered to my office by 3 o'clock, I will permanently liquidate the medical trust. I will let your mother rot in a state ward. The choice is entirely yours." The silence in my ruined studio was deafening. The sharp scent of spilled turpentine and broken glass filled the air, but all I could focus on was the thick manila envelope resting on the table. Charles Sterling stood before me, a monument of arrogant cruelty, perfectly willing to sacrifice his wife's medical care to execute a massive tax fraud. He waited for the tears. He waited for me to beg to scream or to collapse under the crushing weight of his extortion. He wanted to savor my complete submission. I looked at the two security contractors flanking him. Their sheer physical size was meant to intimidate, to remind me that resistance was not just futile, but dangerous. I looked back at my father. The man who had spent 2 decades mocking my artistic ambitions was now demanding I use my professional credentials to shield him from federal prison. The rage inside me was a blinding, white-hot entity threatening to consume my rational thought. But forensic accounting and high-stakes art appraisal require absolute, unyielding emotional control. You do not react to the threat. You evaluate the mechanism of the trap, and you manipulate the variables. "You would let her die in a state ward to save yourself a tax bill," I stated. My voice was eerily calm, devoid of the panic he so desperately wanted to hear. "I am merely protecting the family assets," Chloe Charles replied smoothly, adjusting his expensive tie. "Your mother's care is exorbitant. If the federal government audits my capital gains, the entire family suffers. I am asking you to do your part. Sign the forms. Verify the collection. Ensure your mother remains comfortable." He reached into his tailored jacket and produced a heavy silver Mont Blanc fountain pen. He held it out to me, an elegant metallic weapon designed to end my career and secure his criminal enterprise. I did not hesitate. I did not argue or attempt a futile negotiation. Pleading with a sociopath only validates their power. I reached out and took the silver pen from his hand. The metal felt cold against my skin. Charles smiled. It was a deeply satisfied, victorious smirk. He watched as I pulled the thick stack of federal tax documents from the envelope. The top page was Internal Revenue Service Form 8283, Non-Cash Charitable Contributions. Section B glared up at me, requiring the signature of an independent qualified appraiser to verify the $15 million valuation of Preston's counterfeit art collection. I flattened the document against the table, brushing aside a shard of broken glass. I uncapped the fountain pen. I knew exactly what I was doing. During my tenure at the auction house, our legal compliance team held rigorous seminars on contract law and fraudulent acquisitions. We were trained to recognize coercion. We were trained to spot the subtle, nearly imperceptible deviations in handwriting that occur when an individual is forced to sign a document under threat of violence or extortion. This specific technique is known in federal courtrooms as a duress signature. It is a deliberate, calculated alteration of one's standard signature designed exclusively to flag the document as legally invalid upon forensic examination. I placed the nib of the pen against the signature line. I did not write my name with the fluid sweeping cursive I used for standard appraisals. I gripped the heavy silver barrel tightly intentionally, altering the biomechanics of my hand. I changed the slant of my capital letters, forcing them to lean sharply to the left instead of my natural rightward tilt. I deliberately broke the continuous loop connecting the letters of my last name, creating a stark, unnatural gap. I applied uneven, erratic pressure, ensuring the ink pooled heavily at the terminal points, mimicking the jagged hesitation of a hand operating under severe psychological distress. To the untrained eye of a real estate tycoon, the signature looked perfectly normal. It looked like a woman capitulating to her father's demands. But to a certified forensic document examiner, the signature would scream coercion. It was a digital flare, a legally binding distress signal proving that the appraisal was secured through malicious extortion. I finished the signature and capped the pen. I handed the document and the silver pen back to Charles. "It is done," I said, keeping my face a mask of defeated compliance. "Now lift the freeze on the medical trust." Charles inspected the signature, his arrogant smirk widening. He did not notice the altered slant or the broken loops. He only saw his own victory. He slid the federal tax form back into the manila envelope and tucked it securely into his jacket pocket. "You see, Chloe, family cooperation is not that difficult," Charles mocked, turning toward the broken door. "I will contact the trust administrators this afternoon. Your mother's care will continue uninterrupted. I suggest you clean up this mess and start looking for a new job, perhaps something in retail." He walked out of my studio, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway, followed closely by his two silent security contractors. They left me standing in the wreckage of my workspace, surrounded by shattered glass and broken wood. Charles thought he had secured his $15 million tax deduction. He believed he had successfully insulated himself from the impending museum gala audit by forcing me to take the fall. He had absolutely no idea that he had just walked out the door carrying a legally provable piece of extortion evidence that would guarantee his federal indictment. I did not bother cleaning up the spilled turpentine or the broken easels. I walked directly to my secure steel cabinet, unlocked it, and retrieved my air-gapped laptop. I needed to inform Marcus that the second phase of the trap was successfully armed. Charles had the forged appraisal. The museum gala was proceeding as planned. The explosive was primed. We just needed to wait for Charles to publicly light the fuse. I booted the secure terminal and opened my encrypted communication channel. Before I could even type a message to my brother-in-law, an urgent high-priority alert flashed across my screen. The notification originated from a specialized surveillance script I had deployed earlier that morning, targeting the gallery's internal inventory logs. I clicked the alert, my blood running cold as the new data populated my monitor. The situation was escalating with terrifying velocity. Preston was not simply content with laundering money through fake art sales. He was initiating a completely different, highly dangerous criminal operation. The data stream revealed a newly finalized contract between Preston's gallery and a major international insurance conglomerate. Preston had just secured a comprehensive fine art insurance policy covering the entire counterfeit collection destined for the museum gala. The policy covered damage, theft, and catastrophic loss. The insured value of the fake canvases was listed at a staggering $20 million. Why would Preston insure a collection of fakes for $20 million right before giving them away to a museum? The question hung in the quiet studio. My fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing the insurance policy with Preston's recent communications. I accessed the encrypted shadow ledgers I had siphoned from his gallery. I found a string of burner phone text messages sent from a device pinging off the gallery's Wi-Fi network. The messages were directed to a known high-risk associate operating in the city's industrial district, an individual with an extensive criminal record for arson and commercial sabotage. The messages detailed a specific address, a secondary off-site storage warehouse near the docks where Preston was currently holding the counterfeit collection before the gala transfer. The final text message from Preston sent just an hour ago contained a confirmed cryptocurrency transfer and a chilling explicit instruction. Burn it to the ground tonight. Make sure nothing survives the fire. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Preston was not planning to donate the collection. The tax fraud scheme was a misdirection. He intended to destroy the counterfeit art before it ever reached the museum walls. He had hired an arsonist to torch the warehouse. By claiming a catastrophic total loss, Preston planned to collect the $20 million insurance payout in clean, untraceable cash. He was executing a massive, violent insurance fraud scheme, and he was doing it tonight. The encrypted text detailing the arson plot glowed ominously on my monitor. The scale of my brother's depravity had eclipsed mere white-collar crime. He was now soliciting violent felonies. Torching a commercial warehouse in the densely populated docklands to secure a $20 million insurance payout demonstrated a terrifying disregard for human life and property. I did not waste a second. I bypassed the standard encrypted chat and dialed a highly secure direct line to Marcus's office at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. He answered immediately, his tone clipped. "I saw the data packet hit the server, Chloe. You gave Charles the signature." I gave him a duress signature. I corrected, my eyes fixed on the arson correspondence. "It is legally invalid and establishes a baseline for extortion. But the tax fraud is no longer our primary concern. You need to look at the secondary data stream I just pushed to your terminal. Preston is not donating the art, he is burning it." I heard the rapid staccato clicking of Marcus's keyboard through the speaker. A heavy, profound silence followed as he digested the intercepted burner phone messages and the newly executed insurance policy. $20 million, Marcus murmured, the disbelief evident in his voice. He insured a warehouse full of counterfeit canvases for $20 million, and he hired Jimmy the Torch Valenti to level the building tonight. Your brother is exhibiting a spectacular level of criminal insanity. If the warehouse burns, the evidence of the counterfeit operation turns to ash, I stated, analyzing the tactical board. He collects the insurance money, washes it through his offshore accounts, and Charles claims the museum donation fell through due to an unforeseen tragedy. They both walk away rich, and the paper trail disappears. They are not walking away from anything, Marcus growled, the predatory investigator taking full control. Valenti is a known arsonist. We have had him on our radar for commercial sabotage before, but we never caught him with a live contract. Preston just handed us the entire syndicate on a silver platter. How do we stop the fire without tipping off Preston? I asked. If Valenti does not report back that the job is done, Preston will panic. He will know he is compromised, and he will flee the jurisdiction before the gala. We do not stop the fire, Chloe Marcus replied, a cold, strategic edge sharpening his words. We control the narrative. I am coordinating with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Arson and Explosives Task Force right now. We are going to let Valenti walk into the warehouse. We are going to let him prep the accelerant. We need him dead to rights on the premises to secure the conspiracy charge against your brother. The plan was high risk, a delicate operation operating on a razor-thin margin of error. And the paintings, I pressed. If the counterfeit art burns, we lose the physical evidence of the tax fraud and the money laundering. The art will not burn, Marcus assured me. The FBI tactical team is mobilizing. They will breach the warehouse perimeter, neutralize Valenti and his crew, and secure the counterfeit canvases. We are going to swap the inventory. Swap the inventory, I repeated, intrigued by the audacity of the maneuver. We are going to move the fake paintings to a secure federal evidence locker, Marcus explained. Then the tactical team will deploy controlled, localized incendiary devices within the warehouse structure. We will generate enough smoke and structural damage to satisfy a cursory visual inspection from the street, triggering a legitimate emergency response from the fire department. It will look like a catastrophic blaze to any observer, but the core structure will remain intact. It was a brilliant countermeasure, a staged inferno designed to feed Preston's delusion of success. Valenti's burner phone, I asked, anticipating the final necessary deception. Will be confiscated the moment he is in handcuffs, Marcus confirmed. An undercover agent will use Valenti's device to send the confirmation text to Preston. Your brother will believe his $20 million insurance scam executed flawlessly. He will walk into the museum gala tomorrow night feeling like a god, completely unaware that his counterfeit art is sitting in an FBI locker waiting to be wheeled onto the main stage. The trap was elegantly lethal. I ended the call, leaving Marcus to orchestrate the tactical strike. The hours stretched agonizingly slow. I remained in my ruined studio, the scent of spilled turpentine, a constant reminder of my father's extortion. I monitored the police scanners and local news feeds, waiting for the inevitable report of a commercial fire in the Docklands. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, the scanners crackled to life. Dispatchers directed multiple fire engines to an address matching Preston's secondary storage facility. Local news helicopters captured aerial footage of thick, billowing smoke pouring from the roof of the warehouse. The flames visible through the windows were intense, a dramatic, terrifying visual, confirming a major structural incident. To the untrained eye, it was a devastating commercial disaster. To me, it was the beautiful, synchronized execution of a federal sting operation. 10 minutes later, my burner phone illuminated with a single encrypted text message from Marcus. It contained 2 words: asset secured. The counterfeit collection was safe. Valenti was in federal custody. The fire was a controlled illusion. Across the city, in his luxury downtown penthouse, Preston was undoubtedly celebrating. He was likely pouring a glass of expensive scotch, watching the news coverage of the smoke, and mentally counting the $20 million insurance payout he believed was practically sitting in his bank account. He thought he had outsmarted the museum curators, the federal auditors, and his own family. He thought he had committed the perfect, untraceable crime. He was sleeping soundly on a bed of gasoline, entirely oblivious to the fact that I was holding the match. The morning of the museum gala dawned with a sharp, biting chill in the air. The city was buzzing with anticipation for the grand philanthropic event. The local newspapers ran glowing profiles on Charles Sterling, praising his unprecedented generosity and his commitment to enriching the cultural landscape of the community. They highlighted the tragic warehouse fire, mourning the supposed loss of Preston's inventory, but emphasizing Charles's resilience in moving forward with the donation of the remaining, highly valuable Zephyr collection. It was a masterclass in public relations manipulation, a narrative meticulously crafted to elevate their social standing while masking a multi-million-dollar federal crime. I spent the morning quietly preparing my arsenal. The duress signature was logged. The wire fraud transfers were documented. The counterfeit art was secured in federal custody. The arson conspiracy was actively recorded. The Sterling family was operating under the assumption that their criminal enterprise was impenetrable. My phone vibrated, breaking my intense focus. It was a text message from my father. It was not an invitation to the gala or a superficial inquiry about my well-being. It was a cold, brutal decree designed to ensure my complete isolation during his moment of triumph. You are officially barred from attending the gala tonight, the message read, the digital text projecting his arrogant disdain. Your presence is a liability. Your continued failure and lack of professional standing is an embarrassment to this family. You are no longer welcome at our table. Do not attempt to show up. Security has your photograph. Consider yourself removed from the family trust. I stared at the screen. He was officially disowning me, attempting to erase my existence to protect his pristine, fabricated public image. He wanted me to sit alone in my apartment, stripped of my inheritance, nursing the wounds of his rejection, while he bathed in the adoration of the city elite. I did not type a response. I deleted the message. His words held absolutely no power over me. He was disowning a ghost, unaware that the woman he was banishing possessed the power to eviscerate his entire empire. I walked into my bedroom and opened the garment bag hanging on the closet door. I had selected my attire for the evening with extreme prejudice. I bypassed the subdued neutral tones I normally wore for appraisal work. Tonight, I was not attending as Chloe, the compliant daughter. I was attending as Zephyr. I pulled out a floor-length tailored gown woven from heavy crimson silk. It was a vibrant, unapologetic shade of blood red. It was a dress designed to command the room, a garment that refused to be ignored or pushed into the shadows. I paired it with a genuine, brilliant cut diamond necklace, a piece I had purchased anonymously years ago after selling my first major canvas. It was a stark, undeniable contrast to the cheap cubic zirconia Victoria flaunted. I secured my hair, applied a sharp, precise layer of crimson lipstick, and looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The vulnerable, eager-to-please daughter was completely eradicated. The woman staring back at me was an executioner clad in armor, ready to deliver a fatal public judgment. My burner phone buzzed once more. It was a brief, automated notification from a highly secure, encrypted messaging service utilized exclusively by elite international art brokers. The message was from the director of the City Museum, a man who possessed the ultimate authority over tonight's guest list and exhibition schedule. The main exhibition hall is prepped. The lighting is focused. We are ready for your arrival, Zephyr. I slipped the phone into my clutch. My father had explicitly barred Chloe Sterling from attending his philanthropic triumph. He had instructed security to turn me away at the door. He was absolutely certain I would spend the evening weeping in exile. He was entirely unprepared for the reality that the guest of honor, the elusive artist whose name he was using to legitimize his massive federal tax fraud, was currently stepping into a waiting town car, wearing a blood-red dress and carrying the match that would burn his legacy to the ground. The transition from the calculated tension of my studio to the suffocating opulence of my father's estate felt like stepping into a perfectly staged, highly toxic play. It was Friday evening, exactly 24 hours before the museum gala. Charles had summoned the immediate family to the main dining room under the guise of a celebratory pre-event toast. I knew it was not a celebration. It was a formal execution of my standing within the Sterling family. I arrived precisely at 8 o'clock. The sprawling, high-ceilinged room smelled of roasted lamb and expensive heavy oak. The long mahogany table was set with fine crystal and polished silver, reflecting the ambient glow of the massive chandelier above. Charles sat at the head of the table, projecting the aura of a benevolent king surveying his loyal subjects. Preston sat to his right, wearing a smug, arrogant grin, entirely convinced his $20 million insurance fraud was currently burning to ash in the Docklands. Next to Preston sat Victoria. She was draped in a fresh designer gown, aggressively displaying a pristine, vibrant orange Hermes Birkin bag resting conspicuously on the empty chair beside her. I took my seat near the far end of the table, creating a deliberate physical distance. I did not speak. I simply poured myself a glass of Cabernet and watched the performance begin. Charles did not waste time with pleasantries or inquiries about my day. He raised his wine glass, the crystal catching the light. "Tomorrow night we secure the Sterling legacy," Charles announced, his voice booming with unearned pride. "The donation to the City Museum will elevate our standing in the philanthropic community and, more importantly, ensure the financial vitality of our corporate holdings for the next decade." Preston raised his glass in agreement, a sycophantic smile plastered across his face. "It is a masterstroke, Dad. The gallery is receiving unprecedented media coverage. We are completely untouchable." Victoria patted her expensive handbag, leaning forward to ensure I had a clear view of the logo. "It is so incredibly validating to finally be recognized at this level," she chimed in, her voice laced with sharp, deliberate condescension. "To mingle with true visionaries and city leaders, it requires a certain caliber of presence, does it not?" Charles lowered his glass. The benevolent king facade vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating tyrant preparing to banish a rebellious subject. He turned his piercing gaze directly toward me. "Which brings me to the specific parameters of tomorrow evening," Charles stated, his tone shifting into a rigid, unforgiving register. "Chloe, your recent behavior has been increasingly erratic, unprofessional, and entirely detrimental to the cohesive image this family requires." He paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch across the dining room. He wanted me to squirm. He wanted me to anticipate the blow. I maintained a perfectly neutral expression, taking a slow sip of my wine. "You disgraced Victoria at the garden party," Charles continued, his voice hardening. "You provoked an unnecessary confrontation, displaying a staggering lack of decorum. Furthermore, your termination from the auction house is a public embarrassment. I cannot have an unemployed, disgraced appraiser representing the sterling name at the most important social event of the year. I am officially revoking your invitation to the museum gala, Charles declared. The words hung in the air, a definitive severance. You are barred from attending. Security has been instructed to turn you away if you attempt to approach the venue. You are a stain on this family, a failure who lacks the capacity to stand shoulder to shoulder with the elite. Victoria let out a soft, mocking laugh. She traced the stitching on her Birkin bag, her eyes alight with malicious triumph. It really is for the best, Chloe. You would be terribly out of place among people who actually contribute to society. You can watch the live stream from your little apartment. Preston chuckled, taking a long drink from his glass. Do not worry, little sister. I will make sure they spell your name right on the press release, recognizing my gallery's contribution. That is about as close as you will ever get to the art world again. They were relishing the execution. They were feeding off the perceived power dynamic, convinced they had stripped me of my dignity, my career, and my familial standing. They expected me to fight back. They expected tears begging, or a dramatic emotional outburst defending my worth. I did not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I carefully set my wine glass down on the mahogany table. I looked at Charles, noting the slight twitch in his jaw, a sign of his deep-seated need for absolute control. I looked at Preston, silently analyzing the sweat forming on his brow, the physical manifestation of a man waiting for a $20 million arson confirmation. I looked at Victoria, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her handbag, an anxiety born from managing massive hidden retail debts. I understand, I said quietly. The 3 words were devoid of any inflection. They were an empty echo in the cavernous room. I stood up, pushing my chair back from the table. I smoothed the fabric of my simple black trousers. I did not offer a rebuttal or a defense. I offered them the exact compliant surrender they demanded. If that is all I stated, turning my back on the table, I will leave you to your celebration. I walked out of the dining room, my footsteps rhythmic and steady against the hardwood floor. I did not look back. I could feel their eyes burning into my spine, confused by my lack of resistance, yet ultimately satisfied by my quiet retreat. Charles believed he had successfully neutralized the only variable threatening his massive tax fraud. Preston believed his fake art collection was secure. Victoria believed she had won the petty social war. They were celebrating on a ticking time bomb. I exited the grand estate, the heavy oak front doors closing behind me with a solid, definitive thud. The cool night air hit my face, a sharp contrast to the suffocating, toxic atmosphere inside. I walked down the sweeping stone driveway toward my car. My mind was entirely focused on the intricate sequence of events scheduled for the next 24 hours. The familial ties were officially severed. The guilt and obligation that had anchored me to their dysfunction were gone. I was operating with the clinical, devastating precision of a forensic auditor executing a final judgment. I reached my car and unlocked the door. As I reached for the door handle, a distinct, sharp vibration pulsed against my hip. It was not my primary phone. It was the heavily encrypted, air-gapped device I kept secured in a hidden pocket of my coat. The device only communicated via a proprietary secure protocol utilized exclusively for high-level anonymous interactions within the international art market. I pulled the device out and unlocked the screen. A single priority message illuminated the dark display. The sender was Arthur Vance. He was not a relative, a rival appraiser, or a federal agent. Arthur Vance was the director of the City Museum. He possessed absolute unilateral control over the guest list, the exhibition layout, and the security protocols for the upcoming gala. He was the ultimate gatekeeper of the city's cultural elite. I tapped the screen, opening the encrypted text. The message was brief, professional, and entirely game-changing. The main exhibition hall has been prepped according to your exact specifications. The lighting is focused on the central installation. Security protocols are aligned. We are ready for your arrival, Zephyr. I stared at the glowing text. A slow, chilling smile touched my lips. Charles had barred Chloe Sterling from attending his philanthropic triumph. He had instructed his security to turn his disgraced daughter away at the door. I was absolutely certain I would spend the evening weeping in exile. He was entirely unprepared for the reality that the guest of honor, the elusive artist whose name he was using to legitimize his massive federal tax fraud, possessed a VIP all-access pass to the very stage he intended to command. I slipped the encrypted device back into my pocket and opened the car door. The drive home was quiet. The preparations were complete. Tomorrow night, the City Museum would host a spectacular unveiling. Charles would attempt to secure his $15 million deduction. Preston would attempt to celebrate his insurance payout. Victoria would attempt to flaunt her stolen wealth. They would walk into the grand ballroom expecting a coronation. They would find an executioner wearing a blood-red dress, ready to burn their empire to ash in front of the entire city. The City Museum was a towering monument to architectural grandeur, its neoclassical columns illuminated by harsh dramatic uplighting against the night sky. The Grand Plaza was swarming with luxury vehicles and aggressive valet attendants. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the massive carved oak entrance doors, flanked by velvet ropes and a gauntlet of flashing cameras. Inside the Great Hall was a masterpiece of orchestrated opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung suspended from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the 300 distinguished guests. This was the apex of the city's social hierarchy. Billionaire tech founders, influential politicians, and prominent media figures mingled amid towering floral arrangements, sipping vintage champagne from delicate flutes. At the very center of the room, positioned strategically near the main exhibition entrance, stood the Sterling family. Charles held court exuding the smug, impenetrable confidence of a man who believed he had successfully cheated the federal government out of $15 million. He wore a bespoke tuxedo, laughing loudly at a joke told by a prominent state senator. He was the benevolent philanthropist, the savior of the arts, accepting the adoration of his peers, while his forged tax documents rested securely in his briefcase. Preston stood a few feet away, nursing a glass of scotch. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed the frantic, sleep-deprived anxiety of a man who had orchestrated commercial arson, but his posture radiated arrogant triumph. He believed his fake inventory was ash, his $20 million insurance payout was guaranteed, and his gallery's reputation was cemented by the imminent unveiling of the collection. He occasionally checked his phone, likely waiting for a congratulatory message from a shadow syndicate or a confirmation text from a hired torch. Victoria clung to Preston's arm, wearing a sequined emerald gown that practically screamed for attention. She continuously adjusted her posture, ensuring her vibrant orange Hermes bag was visible to every passing photographer. She was scanning the crowd desperately, calculating social hierarchies, eager to assert her dominance over the wives of the executives she deemed inferior. They were a trinity of breathtaking corruption, basking in a manufactured glory, built entirely on fraud, extortion, and the planned destruction of their own family members. They felt completely invincible. They felt untouchable. They had absolutely no idea the executioner was already inside the building. The heavy carved oak doors of the Great Hall did not swing open gradually. They were pushed apart simultaneously by two uniformed ushers, the brass hinges letting out a low, resonant groan that cut through the ambient noise of the gala. The sudden shift in the room's energy was palpable. The string quartet playing near the champagne tower faltered, dropping a few notes before fading into a confused silence. The low hum of affluent conversation abruptly ceased. Hundreds of heads turned toward the entrance, their attention drawn by the sheer commanding disruption. I stepped through the threshold. I was not wearing the sensible, muted tones of a struggling appraiser. I was not the quiet, compliant daughter who had accepted banishment in the dining room the night before. I was wearing a floor-length tailored gown woven from heavy crimson silk. It was a vibrant, uncompromising shade of blood red. The fabric moved with liquid grace, catching the light from the chandeliers and throwing it back with fierce intensity. It was a garment designed for a conqueror, not a casualty. Around my neck rested a brilliant cut diamond necklace. It was not a cubic zirconia fake designed to project false wealth. It was an authentic, flawless piece I had acquired anonymously through a Swiss broker possessing a refractive index that sent sharp, icy flashes of pure white light dancing across the room. My hair was swept back in a severe, elegant style. My expression was a mask of cold, predatory calm. But I was not walking alone. My arm was linked securely with Marcus. My brother-in-law wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit, his broad shoulders projecting an aura of lethal, unyielding authority. As a senior investigator for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, Marcus was accustomed to entering hostile environments and establishing immediate dominance. He surveyed the crowd with the calculating, detached gaze of a federal agent locking down a crime scene. We stood in the entrance, a stark, terrifying contrast to the sycophantic elite surrounding the Sterling family. The silence in the great hall stretched into a heavy, suffocating vacuum. I locked my eyes directly onto my father. The transformation on Charles's face was a masterpiece of physiological shock. The smug, benevolent smile vanished instantly, wiped away by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated panic. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He stared at the crimson dress, the diamonds, and the imposing presence of Marcus, his mind desperately trying to process the impossible reality standing before him. He had personally revoked my invitation. He had ordered my exile. He expected me to be shattered and isolated. Preston choked on his scotch. He stumbled backward, bumping heavily into a cocktail table and sending a tray of empty glasses clattering to the marble floor. He stared at Marcus, recognizing the rigid, tactical posture of law enforcement. The arrogant gallery owner suddenly looked like a terrified, trapped animal. Victoria let out a sharp, audible gasp. Her hand flew to her chest, her eyes widening as she took in the authentic diamonds resting against my collarbone. The fake socialite realized instantly that her entire fabricated reality was actively collapsing in front of the very audience she desperately craved. Charles recovered his voice, though it lacked its usual booming authority. His survival instincts kicked in, driving him to reassert control through sheer force. He stepped away from the senator, his face twisting into a mask of ugly, desperate rage. He raised a trembling hand and pointed a finger directly at me. "Security!" Charles bellowed, his voice cracking slightly, echoing sharply off the vaulted ceilings. "Security, remove her immediately. This woman is not on the guest list. She is trespassing at a private event. Escort her out of the building." 4 large men in dark suits equipped with discreet earpieces immediately detached themselves from the perimeter. They moved swiftly toward the entrance, their posture aggressive, preparing to physically extract an unwanted intruder. Charles smirked, a fleeting, desperate attempt to reclaim his dominance. He looked around at his wealthy peers, offering a tight, apologetic shrug, silently communicating that he was simply handling an erratic, unstable individual. He expected me to be dragged out, kicking and screaming, completing the narrative he had carefully constructed. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, maintaining my cold, unwavering stare, waiting for the trap to spring shut. The head of security, a broad-shouldered man with a stern, uncompromising expression, reached the front of the pack. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me and Marcus. He did not reach out to grab my arm. He did not issue a command to vacate the premises. Instead, the head of security snapped to attention. He executed a sharp, formal bow, bending at the waist in a display of profound, absolute respect. He straightened up, turned to face the hundreds of stunned guests, and produced a sleek handheld microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the head of security announced, his voice booming through the museum's surround sound system, easily overpowering Charles's frantic demands. "It is my distinct honor to announce the arrival of our guest of honor. Please welcome the visionary behind tonight's exhibition, the artist known to the world as Zephyr." The collective gasp that ripped through the great hall sounded like all the oxygen being violently sucked from the room. The billionaire tech founders, the influential politicians, and the prominent media figures stared at me in stunned, paralyzed disbelief. The anonymous artistic genius they had been discussing, the elusive creator whose canvases commanded millions, was the woman standing in the doorway wearing blood-red silk. Charles stumbled backward, his knees physically buckling. He reached out blindly, grabbing the edge of a linen-covered table to keep from collapsing onto the floor. His mouth opened and closed in rapid, silent gasps. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He had not forced a desperate appraiser to verify his fake collection. He had attempted to extort the actual artist. He had forged federal tax documents using the signature of the very creator he was exploiting. Preston looked as though he might vomit. He stared at the woman he had physically shoved against a wall just days prior. the woman whose career he had threatened to destroy, the woman who had just sold him a $3 million painting. Victoria sank into a chair, her Hermes bag slipping from her grasp and tumbling onto the marble floor. She covered her face with her hands, entirely broken by the sheer magnitude of the humiliation. I looked at the three ruined figures cowering in the center of the room. The execution was primed, the audience was captive. It was time to pull the curtain back and expose the rot beneath their empire. I released Marcus's arm and began walking slowly, deliberately toward the main exhibition wall. The rhythmic click of my heels against the imported marble echoed in the deafening silence of the great hall. I moved with slow, deliberate precision, cutting a crimson path through the sea of paralyzed elites. The crowd parted instinctively, pulling back to avoid the blast radius of the impending detonation. I bypassed the whispering politicians and the staring executives. I walked directly toward the raised platform positioned at the center of the room. The podium was flanked by towering floral arrangements and positioned directly beneath a massive digital screen that currently displayed the crest of the Sterling family real estate empire. Charles stood frozen near the steps of the platform. He held a cordless microphone loosely in his right hand. Just moments before my arrival, he had been preparing to deliver a soaring philanthropic speech. He had planned to gaze benevolently over the crowd, waxing poetic about his profound dedication to cultural enrichment while quietly securing a $15 million federal tax evasion. Now he looked like a man staring down the barrel of a firing squad. I approached him. I did not break stride. I reached out and firmly grasped the cold metal casing of the microphone. Charles tightened his grip for a fraction of a second, his knuckles turning white. A primal, desperate instinct urged him to fight back to maintain control of the narrative. He opened his mouth, searching for a commanding rebuke, but his vocal cords failed him entirely. He stared into my eyes, and what he saw there paralyzed his final defense. He saw the cold, unyielding void of a daughter who had completely excised the need for his approval. He released the microphone. It slid smoothly from his trembling fingers into my steady palm. I stepped past him, ascending the short wooden stairs to the podium. I turned to face the hundreds of distinguished guests. The glare of the spotlights washed over me, illuminating the blood-red silk of my gown and the sharp, authentic flashes of the diamond necklace. I raised the microphone. My father frequently told me that painting was a hobby for failures. I began, my voice resonating through the museum's surround sound system, crystal clear and utterly devoid of emotion. He insisted that true power was found in real estate, in corporate leverage and tangible assets that could be manipulated and controlled. He told me to get a real career. A murmur of uncomfortable tension rippled through the crowd. The wealthy attendees exchanged nervous glances, sensing the drastic departure from a standard philanthropic address. But he was wrong. I continued pacing slowly across the platform. Art is not a hobby, and it is certainly not a fragile emotional pursuit. When utilized correctly, art is a weapon. I locked eyes with Preston, who was currently cowering near the cocktail bar. His face was slick with a cold sweat. He was frantically tapping his phone, likely trying to reach his shadow syndicate lenders, or the arsonist he believed had just destroyed his warehouse. My brother Preston operates a high-end gallery in the financial district, I stated, gesturing vaguely in his direction. He curates collections for the elite. He buys and sells prestige. Recently, he acquired a collection of 25 canvases attributed to the artist Zephyr. Tonight, my father planned to donate that collection to this museum, claiming a philanthropic tax deduction valued at $15 million. I paused, letting the staggering financial figure settle over the silent room. He required a certified independent appraiser to sign Internal Revenue Service Form 8283 to legally verify the authenticity and value of the donation. When he could not find a legitimate expert willing to risk federal prison, he turned to his daughter. He threatened to revoke the funding for my mother's neurological care facility unless I provided a coerced signature. A loud collective gasp erupted from the audience. Several prominent politicians visibly recoiled, taking immediate physical steps away from Charles. The revelation of brutal familial extortion shattered the carefully curated illusion of the Sterling dynasty. Charles lunged toward the edge of the platform, his face contorting into an ugly mask of panic and rage. "Turn off her microphone," he bellowed, waving his arms frantically at the museum staff. She is unstable. She is lying. This is a vindictive smear campaign. The museum staff did not move. They looked toward Arthur Vance, the museum director, who was standing quietly near the back of the hall. Vance offered a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The microphone stayed live. I ignored my father's hysterical outburst. I reached into the hidden pocket of my gown and retrieved a small, sleek remote control. I pressed a single button. The massive digital screen behind me flickered. The Sterling family crest vanished, replaced instantly by a stark, highly detailed technical presentation. The image displayed a split-screen comparison. On the left was a high-resolution microscopic image of genuine hand-applied oil paint. On the right was an identical magnified view of a canvas from Preston's collection. "This is what happens when you use art as a weapon," I announced, pointing toward the glaring digital evidence. "You apply forensic spectroscopy. You analyze the molecular composition of the pigments. A genuine Zephyr canvas utilizes specific hand-mixed cobalt and cadmium layered over a textured underpainting." I pressed the remote again. Red circles highlighted severe anomalies on the right side of the screen. "The canvases my brother imported, the collection my father is currently attempting to use to defraud the United States government out of millions in tax revenue, contain zero hand-applied pigment. They are completely devoid of brushstroke depth. The spectroscopic analysis confirms they were printed using industrial-grade solvent-based aerosol jets on synthetic canvas rolls. They were manufactured in a factory in Southeast Asia and imported under fraudulent customs declarations." I turned my head and looked directly at Charles. He was clutching his chest, his breathing ragged and shallow. "You are not donating a $15 million masterpiece collection, Dad," I stated, delivering the final, devastating truth. "You are attempting to dump a shipment of mass-produced Chinese hotel decor onto a public institution to evade your corporate tax liabilities." The Great Hall erupted into absolute chaos. The quiet, dignified atmosphere was obliterated by shouting voices, flashing cameras, and the frantic movement of investors scrambling to distance themselves from the imploding Sterling empire. Preston could not handle the exposure. The arrogant gallery owner snapped. He shoved past a group of terrified guests, knocking a waiter to the ground, and sprinted toward the stage. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and filled with the feral, destructive panic of a cornered animal. He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the elite audience. I was watching his entire life, his fraudulent business and his freedom vanish into the harsh glare of the projector screen. He needed to silence the source of his destruction. Preston lunged up the stairs of the platform, his hands curling into tight, violent fists, aiming directly for my throat. He entirely failed to account for the man standing in the shadows just behind me. The collective gasp from the elite audience morphed into a sustained, chaotic hum of shock and disbelief. The spectroscopic evidence displayed on the massive digital screen was damning, but it was abstract. It was a digital projection of molecular data that the wealthy patrons struggled to visually comprehend. Preston seized upon this hesitation. He scrambled up the remaining steps of the platform, his face contorted in a desperate, ugly panic. He bypassed our father, shoving past the floral arrangements, and positioned himself aggressively between me and the crowd. "She is having a psychological episode," Preston shouted, his voice cracking as he waved his arms frantically toward the audience. "My sister has a documented history of severe mental instability. This is a paranoid delusion. She hacked the museum's visual system to display fabricated charts because she is insanely jealous of my success. The collection is entirely authentic. I have the provenance paperwork from Geneva." He turned toward the central display wall, gesturing wildly at the physical canvas resting under the spotlight. It was the same chaotic blend of indigo and gold he had proudly unveiled in the dining room days ago. The piece he claimed was worth $2 million. "Look at the brushwork," Preston demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the canvas. "Look at the texture. No industrial printer could replicate the depth of a genuine Zephyr. She is lying to you because she is a failed, bitter appraiser who wants to destroy her own family." The wealthy investors in the front row hesitated. The narrative of the hysterical, jealous sibling was a familiar trope in high society. A few politicians exchanged uncertain glances, weighing the digital spectroscopy against the physical artwork hanging under the museum's prestigious lighting. Preston was desperately trying to gaslight a room of 300 people, hoping his tailored suit and confident bluster would override the hard data. I did not argue with his frantic monologue. I did not engage in a screaming match to defend my sanity. Arguing with a cornered fraudster only validates their delusion. I simply reached into my small black silk evening clutch. I withdrew a sleek, unmarked glass vial containing exactly 4 ounces of a highly concentrated specialized chemical solvent. It was a proprietary blend I used in my private studio to strip away experimental layers without damaging the structural weave of a canvas. It was engineered to dissolve synthetic acrylics and aerosol-based polymers in seconds. I stepped around Preston, ignoring his erratic gestures, and walked directly up to the illuminated masterpiece. The sudden, purposeful movement caused the murmuring crowd to fall silent once again. The press corps, positioned near the back of the hall, instinctively raised their cameras, the rapid-fire clicking of shutters filling the quiet space. True provenance is not established by paperwork forged in Geneva. Preston restated, my voice projecting clearly over the microphone I still held in my left hand. True provenance is embedded in the physical reality of the object itself. You claim this piece possesses the structural depth of a genuine zephyr. I unscrewed the cap of the glass vial. The sharp, acrid scent of the chemical solvent immediately hit the air, cutting through the fragrance of expensive perfumes and floral centerpieces. Let us examine that depth. Without a second of hesitation, I raised my arm and splashed the clear, concentrated solvent directly across the lower right quadrant of the $2 million canvas. Preston let out a horrified, guttural shriek. "What are you doing? Stop her! She is destroying the art!" The reaction of the canvas was instantaneous and violent. The solvent hit the fabric, and the illusion of high-value contemporary art melted away in real time. The vibrant indigo and gold lines did not smear or blend like traditional oil paints. They blistered, bubbled, and liquefied. The cheap synthetic aerosol polymers used by the overseas counterfeiter could not withstand the chemical assault. The colors dripped down the canvas in a muddy, chaotic stream, pooling onto the pristine museum floor. Within 5 seconds, a large rectangular patch of the canvas was completely stripped bare, revealing the stark white industrial-grade fabric beneath. But the canvas was not entirely blank. I reached into my clutch again and pulled out a small, high-powered ultraviolet flashlight. I aimed the beam directly at the newly exposed, dripping white section of the fabric. Under the harsh purple glow of the UV light, a hidden message blazed to life. The words were written in a specialized invisible fluorescent ink that I had personally applied to the blank canvas roll before my brother ever shipped it to his overseas counterfeiter. The message, glowing brilliantly against the ruined painting, read in stark, undeniable block letters, "Counterfeit material, manufactured to indict Preston Sterling." The sheer, staggering reality of the physical evidence silenced the room completely. The digital charts were one thing, but seeing a hidden fluorescent confession emerge from beneath the melting paint of a supposed masterpiece was a visceral, undeniable confirmation of massive fraud. The cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing the glowing text and the dripping, ruined canvas. I lowered the UV flashlight and turned to face my brother. "You didn't just buy fake art, Preston," I said, my voice echoing in the dead quiet of the great hall. "You bought the specific blank canvases I prepared and seeded into the black market supply chain 6 months ago. I knew exactly which overseas factory you were using to print your fakes. I supplied them the material. I tracked every single piece you imported. You built your entire fraudulent empire on a foundation I designed." Preston stared at the glowing words on the canvas. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. The arrogant gallery owner persona fractured, completely revealing the terrified, incompetent criminal hiding underneath. He realized the scope of his failure. He hadn't just been caught, he had been orchestrated. He had spent millions of dollars importing the very evidence that would send him to federal prison. The humiliation and the absolute destruction of his reality broke his mind. The panic morphed instantly into a feral, unhinged rage. He did not care about the cameras, the elite audience, or the federal tax laws. He only saw the woman who had systematically dismantled his life and exposed him as a total fraud. Preston let out a raw, animalistic roar. He lunged across the short distance separating us on the stage. His hands formed into rigid claws, aiming directly for my throat. He intended to strangle me right there under the museum spotlights, completely consumed by his violent impulse to silence the architect of his ruin. He moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and blind fury, entirely focused on my face. He completely forgot about the towering, broad-shouldered man in the dark suit, standing silently in the shadows just 2 paces behind me. Preston's hands were inches from my neck when his forward momentum met a sudden, immovable object. I did not flinch or raise my arms to block him. I simply stood my ground. Marcus moved with the terrifying kinetic efficiency of a highly trained federal operative. He stepped out from the periphery of the spotlight, his large hand snapping forward to intercept Preston's leading wrist. He did not throw a punch or engage in a messy brawl. He executed a flawless tactical joint lock. Marcus twisted Preston's arm downward, applying precise, agonizing pressure to the shoulder and elbow. Preston let out a sharp yelp of pain as his center of gravity was violently disrupted. Marcus swept his leg, kicking Preston's expensive Italian leather shoes out from under him. The gallery owner crashed face first onto the hard-polished marble of the platform with a sickening thud. The impact knocked the wind completely out of his lungs, leaving him gasping and pinned flat against the stone. Marcus drove his knee firmly into the center of Preston's back, immobilizing him entirely. With a smooth, practiced motion, Marcus reached under his tailored suit jacket and withdrew his official credentials. He flipped the leather wallet open, holding the gleaming gold badge of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division high for the entire shocked audience to see. Preston Sterling. Marcus's voice boomed across the great hall, cutting through the stunned silence like a gavel striking a block. You are under arrest. As if acting on a synchronized cue, the heavy ambient silence outside the museum was shattered by the rising aggressive wail of multiple approaching sirens. The red and blue strobe lights from a dozen squad cars began reflecting off the towering glass windows of the museum facade, painting the opulent ballroom in frantic, alternating colors. The elite crowd, previously paralyzed by the artistic sabotage, suddenly realized they were standing in the epicenter of a major federal raid. Panic, sharp and contagious, rippled through the attendees. The billionaire investors and prominent politicians began to scatter frantically, pushing toward the side exits to distance themselves from the radioactive scandal exploding on the main stage. They didn't make it to the doors. The massive carved oak entrances burst open. A coordinated wave of law enforcement operatives flooded the hall. Dozens of federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers, emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, fanned out across the marble floor. They moved with swift, silent authority, immediately securing the perimeter and blocking every available exit route. Nobody leaves the building, the lead tactical agent shouted, his voice amplified by a bullhorn. Please remain where you are. This venue is currently under federal lockdown pending asset seizure. The guests halted, trapped in their expensive gowns and tailored tuxedos, watching as their privileged reality collided with undeniable legal force. On the stage, Marcus reached onto his duty belt and unclasped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. He pulled Preston's arms roughly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the ratcheting mechanisms locking into place echoed clearly over the remaining murmurs of the crowd. You are being taken into federal custody. Marcus continued reciting the charges with cold administrative precision while lifting a struggling Preston to his knees. You are facing a multi-count indictment for interstate wire fraud, aggravated money laundering, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Preston, his nose bleeding slightly from the impact with the floor, looked up at Marcus with a mixture of terror and bewildered rage. Insurance fraud. Preston choked out, his voice hoarse. What are you talking about? The warehouse burned down. It was an accident. My entire inventory is gone. Your inventory is currently sitting in an FBI evidence locker in the industrial district, Marcus corrected, hauling Preston to his feet. We intercepted your arsonist, Jimmy Valenti, outside the perimeter. We seized the counterfeit canvases before we deployed the controlled smoke charges. You paid $20,000 in cryptocurrency to torch an empty building, Preston. You literally purchased your own federal conspiracy charge. Preston sagged against Marcus's grip, his eyes wide and vacant. The realization that his brilliant, untraceable scheme had been monitored and manipulated by federal agents from the very beginning completely broke his spirit. He had no defense. He had no leverage. He was a ruined man. Charles Sterling, standing near the edge of the stage, watched his golden child being shackled by his son-in-law. The arrogant patriarch, who had spent decades orchestrating complex real estate scams and belittling my existence, finally comprehended the magnitude of the trap. The museum donation was dead. His $15 million tax deduction was a smoking crater. His primary money laundering operation was in federal custody. Survival instinct honed by years of corporate ruthlessness overtook his shock. He knew the FBI agents securing the doors would eventually turn their attention to him. He needed to protect his remaining capital. He needed to shield his personal wealth before the federal freeze expanded to his offshore accounts. Charles slowly, quietly took a step backward, inching toward the heavy velvet curtains draped behind the podium. He slipped his hand into his breast pocket, his fingers wrapping frantically around his encrypted mobile phone. He was preparing to dial his elite crisis management attorneys, intending to initiate an immediate massive transfer of liquid assets to a non-extradition jurisdiction. He thought he could slip away in the chaos. He thought his vast wealth would afford him a head start. He didn't notice Marcus track the movement. "I wouldn't bother making that call," Charles Marcus stated loudly, projecting his voice over the noise of the tactical agents securing the room. Charles froze mid-step, his hand still buried in his jacket pocket. He looked back at Marcus, his face a mask of furious, cornered desperation. "You have no authority over me," Charles spat, attempting to summon his fading patriarchal dominance. "My son's business dealings are his own. I am a private citizen attending a philanthropic event. You cannot hold me responsible for his administrative errors." Marcus did not argue the legal nuance. He did not engage in a debate about corporate liability. Instead, he reached into the inner breast pocket of his own suit jacket. He withdrew a single folded piece of thick, high-quality paper. It was Internal Revenue Service Form 8283, the exact non-cash charitable contribution document Charles had forced me to sign in my ruined studio 24 hours ago. Marcus unfolded the document and held it up, ensuring the bright stage lights illuminated the bottom section. The signature block was clearly visible, displaying the jagged, unnaturally slanted ink of my name. "I am not arresting you for your son's business dealings," Marcus replied, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register that carried a promise of absolute destruction. "I am arresting you for what you forced your daughter to do." The crisp white expanse of IRS Form 8283 seemed to glow under the museum's harsh spotlights. Charles stared at the document held firmly in Marcus's hand, his eyes tracking the jagged leftward slant of my signature. For a man who had built his entire empire on reading the fine print and exploiting legal loopholes, the realization of his own fatal oversight was a physical blow. He had demanded that signature. He had secured it through a brutal, calculated threat against his own wife's medical care. He believed he had obtained an impenetrable shield against federal auditors. "That signature is legally invalid," Marcus announced, his voice echoing with the crushing weight of a federal indictment. "Forensic document examiners at the agency reviewed this file 3 hours ago. The altered biomechanics, the specific break in the cursive loops, and the severe change in angle are all textbook indicators of a duress signature. It is a legally recognized distress signal, utilized specifically when a party is forced to execute a contract under the immediate threat of violence or malicious retaliation." Charles lowered his hand, his grip on his encrypted phone slackening entirely. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly pale sheen across his skin. "You use the ongoing specialized medical care of your wife as leverage to compel a certified appraiser to verify a fraudulent $15 million tax deduction." Marcus continued, pacing slowly toward the edge of the platform. "You did not just commit attempted tax evasion, Charles. You engaged in felony extortion across state lines. You created a documented, verifiable paper trail of federal blackmail. I am a major philanthropist." Charles stammered, his voice losing its booming authority, reducing to a frantic, breathy rasp. He looked toward the crowd of wealthy donors, desperately searching for an ally, someone to intervene on behalf of his status. The crowd actively shrank back, avoiding eye contact, treating him like a radioactive hazard. "I employ hundreds of people in this city. You cannot simply arrest me based on a sloppy signature. I will have my legal team tear this apart before midnight. "There is no legal team waiting for your call," Mr. Sterling Marcus replied with cold, clinical satisfaction. "A defense attorney requires a retainer. They require liquid capital. And as of 2 o'clock this afternoon, you possess absolutely neither." Charles froze. His chest heaved with a sudden sharp intake of air. Based on the preliminary evidence of organized money laundering tied directly to your Delaware shell companies, a federal judge authorized a comprehensive asset freeze under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, Marcus stated, delivering the final inescapable verdict. "Every single bank account bearing your name is currently locked. Your commercial real estate holdings are frozen pending seizure. The family trust fund has been seized by the Department of Justice." The reality of total financial annihilation crashed down upon the Sterling patriarch. The wealth that had shielded him from consequences, the money he had used to bully and manipulate his entire family, was gone. It vanished with a judicial signature, leaving him entirely exposed. Down on the main floor, standing near the overturned cocktail tables, Victoria heard the words, "asset freeze." The panic that had been simmering beneath her sequined gown suddenly boiled over into blind, frantic survival instinct. She realized her entire manufactured reality was imploding. Her husband was in handcuffs. Her father-in-law was bankrupt. The luxurious lifestyle funded entirely by illicit cash and fraudulent gallery sales was evaporating into thin air. If the federal government was seizing assets, they would seize everything she owned. Victoria did not look at Preston. She did not attempt to defend the family. She hiked up the heavy emerald silk of her designer gown, clutching her vibrant orange Hermes bag tightly against her chest like a life preserver. She turned on her expensive heels and sprinted toward the secondary exit near the museum's catering kitchens. She intended to flee the venue, hoping to secure whatever jewelry and cash she had stashed at their suburban estate before the federal agents arrived with the eviction notices. She made it exactly 15 feet. 2 female tactical agents, positioned discreetly near the service corridor, moved to intercept her with practiced efficiency. They stepped directly into her path, cutting off her escape route. Victoria skidded to a halt, her heels slipping on the polished marble. "Out of my way!" Victoria shrieked, her aristocratic facade completely shattered, replaced by the shrill desperation of a cornered thief. "I have nothing to do with this. I am leaving." She attempted to shove past the agent on the left. The agent did not yield. With a swift, fluid motion, the agent grabbed Victoria by the wrist, twisting her arm firmly but securely behind her back. The second agent stepped in her hands, moving expertly to neutralize the threat. "Ma'am, you are detaining a potential flight risk," the first agent stated calmly, effortlessly subduing the thrashing socialite. "Do not touch me. This is a $20,000 dress," Victoria wailed, struggling pointlessly against the unyielding grip. The second agent ignored her complaints. She reached out and firmly gripped the handle of the bright orange Hermes bag Victoria was clutching so desperately. With a sharp, definitive tug, the agent pulled the luxury item from Victoria's grasp. "Hey, give that back! That is my personal property!" Victoria screamed, tears of genuine panic finally spilling over her expertly contoured cheeks. "This item is being seized as evidence," the agent replied, holding the bag up and quickly attaching a plastic evidence tag to the handle. "Given the extensive documentation linking your husband's personal expenditures to the laundered funds, all luxury items purchased within the last 12 months are subject to immediate federal forfeiture. This bag was acquired using the proceeds of felony wire fraud. It is now property of the United States government." Victoria let out a devastating guttural sob. She slumped forward against the agent's hold, her legs giving out as she watched the ultimate symbol of her unearned status being bagged and tagged like common street contraband. The sheer, overwhelming humiliation of being stripped of her wealth in front of the very social circle she had desperately tried to dominate broke her completely. Back on the stage, the chaotic sounds of Victoria's arrest echoed loudly, providing a grim soundtrack to Charles's final moments of power. He watched his daughter-in-law collapse in tears. He watched his golden son Preston standing silently in steel handcuffs, his face bruised and defeated. He looked out at the sea of flashing press cameras, knowing his legacy was permanently destroyed. The stress, the sheer velocity of his empire's collapse finally took a physical toll on his aging body. Charles groaned, a deep, painful sound originating from deep within his chest. He staggered backward, his hand flying up to grip the fabric over his heart. His knees buckled under his weight. He collapsed heavily onto the hard marble floor of the stage, gasping for shallow breaths of air. The arrogant tycoon was reduced to a fragile, terrified old man grasping at his chest. The tactical agents did not rush forward with medical kits. Marcus did not offer assistance. They recognized the classic physiological response to an acute panic attack brought on by the sudden catastrophic loss of control. Charles lay on his side, his breath wheezing as he looked up. His desperate, bloodshot eyes bypassed Marcus and locked directly onto me. The father who had spent 20 years calling me a failure, who had demanded I abandon my passion to serve his greed, who had threatened to let my mother die in a state ward to save his tax bill, was now staring up at me from the cold floor. Chloe Charles gasped, his voice a pathetic, ragged whisper. He reached a trembling, wrinkled hand toward the hem of my red silk gown. "Please, I am your father. You cannot let them do this. Talk to them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Have some mercy. We are blood." He was begging. He was invoking the very familial bond he had weaponized and destroyed, hoping to extract one final ounce of loyalty from the daughter he had treated like a disposable asset. I stood tall on the elevated podium, looking down at the man writhing at my feet. The bright museum spotlights cast harsh, unforgiving shadows across his terrified face. I did not step back from his reaching hand. I did not flinch. I let the silence stretch a heavy, suffocating weight that forced him to confront the absolute void where my daughterly affection used to reside. I looked at him with eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter ocean. The ambient noise of the great hall, the frantic whispers of the elite, the sharp commands of the federal agents, the distant wail of arriving ambulances faded into a dull, meaningless hum. My universe narrowed to the trembling figure of Charles Sterling gasping on the marble stage. He was waiting for my reaction. He anticipated a dramatic, tearful outburst, a cathartic release of decades of pent-up resentment. He expected the emotionally volatile daughter he had spent his life belittling. I offered him absolutely nothing. I did not raise my voice to hurl insults. I did not kick his outstretched hand away or gloat over his physical collapse. Gloating is an admission that the enemy's actions still hold power over your emotions. True, devastating punishment requires complete, unadulterated apathy. I stepped gracefully down from the raised podium. The heavy crimson silk of my gown whispered against the stone steps. I walked until I stood directly in front of him, close enough to see the beads of cold sweat dotting his pale forehead. I looked down at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a dying insect. "You were right about one thing, Dad," I stated. My voice was pitched low, yet it carried a lethal, resonant clarity. I knew the ambient microphones utilized by the press corps near the stage were picking up every single syllable. I intended for them to capture this execution perfectly. Charles blinked, his breathing hitching, as a desperate, pathetic spark of hope flared in his eyes. He thought I was offering a concession. He thought I was finally validating his patriarchal authority in his darkest hour. "I do not possess a real job." I continued, maintaining my unbroken, icy stare. I never viewed appraising as a career. It was merely a convenient vantage point, a way to study the market dynamics while I built my actual enterprise. The spark of hope in Charles's eyes extinguished, replaced by profound confusion. He wheezed, clutching his chest. "What are you talking about, Chloe? You are an appraiser. You have no money. You rely on my estate." I offered a slow, chilling smile. It was not a smile of joy. It was the physical manifestation of his impending obsolescence. "I do not work to earn a paycheck, Charles. I work because I control the market." I crouched down smoothly, bringing my face level with his terrified, sweating features. "I am Zephyr. The paintings you tried to donate, the canvases, Preston imported the reputation you attempted to exploit to save your sinking company. It all originated from my studio." Charles stopped breathing. The biological necessity for oxygen was overridden by the catastrophic failure of his cognitive processing. His jaw slackened. He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, as the impossible magnitude of my statement crashed into his reality. "The art world does not pay in hourly wages, Dad," I whispered, delivering the final crushing blow. "They pay in multi-million-dollar acquisitions. My net worth has exponentially exceeded your highly leveraged, debt-ridden real estate portfolio for the last 5 years. I could purchase your entire holding company in cash and liquidate it before lunch." The realization hit him with the force of a physical strike. The daughter he had mocked, the woman he had dismissed as a financial burden, was the elusive billionaire artist he had been worshipping. He had spent months trying to steal pennies from the federal government, entirely unaware that he was attempting to extort the wealthiest individual in his own bloodline. The sheer staggering irony of his situation broke whatever microscopic fragment of dignity he had left. He let out a weak, pathetic whimper. It was a sound devoid of humanity, the noise of an arrogant titan realizing he was nothing more than dust. I stood up, smoothing the front of my gown. I turned my back on him, completely severing the connection forever. Marcus stepped forward, stepping seamlessly into the space I had just vacated. The federal investigator did not look at me. His focus was entirely on the broken man on the floor. He reached onto his tactical belt and produced a second set of heavy steel handcuffs. "Charles Sterling," Marcus announced, his voice booming with uncompromising legal authority. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit extortion, felony tax evasion, and violating the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." Two tactical agents hauled Charles to his feet. His legs could not support his weight. He sagged against their grip, a hollow, empty shell. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting securely around his wrists echoed loudly across the stage, a flawless harmony to the cuffs, currently binding Preston a few feet away. "Take them to the transport vehicles," Marcus commanded. The agents marched Charles and Preston toward the main exit. The path they took was lined with the very billionaires, politicians, and socialites they had invited to witness their philanthropic triumph. The crowd did not offer sympathetic murmurs. They stared in silent, disgusted fascination. The Sterling men were paraded through the great hall, their heads bowed, their bespoke suits rumpled and ruined. As they reached the heavy oak doors, the press corps erupted. The flashing strobes of dozens of high-speed cameras illuminated the grand entryway, casting rapid, blinding bursts of stark white light across the marble floor. The journalists shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a chaotic frenzy, desperate to capture the exact moment the powerful Sterling dynasty was publicly eradicated. The blinding flashes reflected in my diamond necklace as I watched them disappear into the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting federal convoy. The visual documentation of their disgrace was now permanent, archived in the digital ether for eternity. They were erased from the social registry, banished from the boardrooms, and permanently exiled from the world they had sacrificed their morality to conquer. The execution was flawless, but the tactical victory was not the end of the war. A battlefield requires reconstruction, and I had inherited a kingdom built on ashes. The heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block, sealing the fate of the Sterling dynasty. 6 months had evaporated since the museum gala. Federal courtrooms lack the dramatic flair of television dramas. They are cold, bureaucratic chambers where lives are reduced to statutes and sentencing guidelines. The presiding judge adjusted his glasses, reading the final verdict into the official record. There were no plea deals. The Department of Justice possessed an airtight dossier containing offshore routing numbers, forged appraisal documents, and recorded arson conspiracies. The prosecution did not need to negotiate. Charles and Preston sat at the defense table. The physical transformation of the two men was staggering. The bespoke Italian suits had been confiscated, replaced by the stiff, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit standard to federal inmates. Charles appeared hollowed out. The arrogant posture that defined his entire existence had crumbled, leaving a frail, silent old man staring blankly at the polished wood of the defense table. Preston fared worse. His hands trembled constantly. He wept without making a sound, tears carving clean tracks through the pallor of his skin. The judge sentenced them both to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Federal law mandates offenders serve 85% of their sentence. They would not see the outside world until they were broken, forgotten men. The bailiff stepped forward, securing the steel chains around their wrists and ankles. The clinking metal echoed in the silent courtroom as they were led through the side door. I sat in the back row watching them disappear. I felt no sorrow. I felt a profound cleansing emptiness. Across town, the harsh scent of industrial bleach permeated the lobby of the Belmont Towers. Victoria knelt on the cold marble floor. The sequined gowns and Hermes bags were distant memories seized during the initial asset forfeiture. She wore a shapeless gray polyblend uniform issued by the commercial cleaning company that hired her minimum wage labor. Her manicured nails were chipped, her hands raw from harsh detergents. She dragged a wet mop across the pristine stone. The Belmont Towers was the exact luxury condominium complex she had spent years mocking, claiming its residents lacked the pedigree of true generational wealth. Now she was scrubbing their footprints. A resident walked past his expensive leather shoes, leaving a faint trail of muddy water on the freshly cleaned surface. He did not look at her. He did not apologize. To the elite inhabitants of the building, she was invisible. Victoria gripped the wooden handle of the mop, her jaw tight, forced to swallow her pride and clean the mess to survive another shift. The reality of her bankruptcy was a slow, daily grinding of her fragile ego. The sprawling Sterling estate sat perched on a hill overlooking the city skyline. Following the criminal convictions, the bank executed a swift foreclosure, eager to liquidate the property to satisfy the outstanding corporate debts. When the estate hit the commercial market, it was purchased within 24 hours via an all-cash offer from an anonymous philanthropic trust. I stood in the grand entryway, the heavy oak doors propped wide open to let the crisp autumn breeze circulate through the house. The oppressive, dark mahogany paneling my father loved had been stripped away. Contractors had spent the last 2 months knocking down the dividing walls, transforming the segmented formal rooms into sprawling, light-filled galleries. The heavy velvet curtains were gone, replaced by sheer linen that allowed natural sunlight to flood the hardwood floors. The Charles Sterling estate was officially dead. The Zephyr Foundation for Young Contemporary Artists had taken its place. Dozens of wooden easels dotted the former formal living room. Stations equipped with premium oil paints, charcoals, and drafting paper stood ready for the inaugural class of underprivileged students arriving the following morning. I walked through the corridors, listening to the quiet serenity of a space purged of its toxic history. Footsteps echoed from the main entrance. Marcus and Maya stepped into the foyer. My younger sister looked radiant. The suffocating anxiety that plagued her during Charles's reign had lifted. Her suburban home, the property Preston attempted to leverage to a shadow syndicate, was fully paid off, secured by the $3 million international wire transfer I intercepted and rerouted to clear the fraudulent lien. Maya walked forward, wrapping her arms around me in a fierce, grounded embrace. Marcus stood beside her, shedding the rigid posture of a federal investigator. He wore a relaxed linen jacket, his badge left safely in his desk drawer downtown. He held 3 crystal flutes and a bottle of vintage champagne. He poured the sparkling liquid, handing a glass to me and one to Maya. "To new management," Marcus said, raising his flute. The crystal chimed as our glasses met. The sound was bright, ringing through the open halls of the foundation. I took a slow sip, the cool liquid, a perfect contrast to the lingering memories of this house. I gestured for them to follow me into the space that used to serve as the formal dining room. The long, imposing table where my father once handed me a $5,000 check and ordered me to abandon my passion was gone. The room was now a vast exhibition space. We walked toward the center wall. Hanging under a specialized museum-grade spotlight was a massive canvas. It was a chaotic, brilliant explosion of raw indigo, pierced by jagged, textured strikes of gold leaf. The layers possessed profound depth, achieved through weeks of painstaking underpainting and precise rhythmic brushwork. It was a genuine Zephyr. The current market valuation for the piece sat firmly at $10 million. It hung on the exact spot where Charles had thrown his insulting check. I stood before the canvas, tracing the gold lines with my eyes. The journey from a dismissed, mocked daughter to the architect of a cultural empire was complete. The urge to scream at those who belittle you is a natural human instinct. Society expects the wronged party to demand apologies, to force loud confrontations, and to seek validation through dramatic arguments. But arguing with individuals committed to their own arrogant delusions yields nothing but exhausted vocal cords. True power operates in silence. When they hand you an insult, you do not throw it back. You study the paper it is written on. You map the vulnerabilities in their armor. You let them build their glass houses, and you quietly acquire the deed to the land underneath. The ultimate retribution does not involve raising your voice. The most devastating punishment you can inflict upon those who try to bury you is to let them live long enough to watch you build an impenetrable empire on the exact ground they pushed you down on. The afternoon sun streams through the newly installed skylights of the Zephyr Foundation, casting long geometric beams across the hardwood floor. I stand alone in the gallery after Marcus and Maya have left, listening to the quiet hum of a building that once suffocated me. The air no longer smells like expensive cigars and manufactured superiority. It smells like fresh paint raw canvas and untouched potential. I look at the $10 million artwork hanging on the wall and realize the journey from a dismissed appraiser to the architect of my own destiny yielded 3 vital truths. First blood is merely a biological coincidence, not a binding contract. Society conditions us to tolerate profound disrespect from our relatives under the guise of family loyalty. My father and brother expected me to absorb their insults and execute their federal crimes simply because we shared a last name. But true family does not treat you like a disposable shield. You owe zero allegiance to people who view your existence as a line item on a balance sheet. Walking away from toxic bloodlines is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Second, silence is a far deadlier weapon than anger. When someone actively tries to humiliate you or destroy your career, the instinct is to scream to defend your honor and to demand immediate justice. I learned that reacting emotionally only hands the predator the exact chaos they crave. By maintaining a cold, unyielding exterior, you deprive them of their power. You let them believe their manipulation is working. You allow their arrogance to blind them, while you quietly audit their vulnerabilities and construct a trap they will never see coming. A quiet mind is an impenetrable fortress. Third, the concept of revenge is deeply misunderstood. Destroying your enemies provides a fleeting thrill, but true permanent retribution requires building an untouchable reality. I did not just send Charles and Preston to a federal penitentiary or force Victoria into a minimum wage uniform. I purchased the very estate where they mocked my ambitions and transformed it into a sanctuary for the next generation of creators. I erased their legacy and replaced it with my own. You do not win by merely tearing down their glass houses. You win by purchasing the land underneath and erecting a skyscraper. We all encounter individuals who attempt to minimize our worth to inflate their fragile egos. The choice is whether you accept their evaluation or rewrite the entire market. If you found power in this journey, if you know what it means to turn profound betrayal into an unshakable empire, drop a comment below and share your own story of survival. Hit that subscribe button and join our community here at Rabbit Revenge, where we know the best response to toxicity is a flawless, calculated checkmate.